Hello friends, did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. It was toward the end of October. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday night. The temperature difference between night and day in the Nevada desert is so extreme. The scorching heat of midday gives way to temperatures near freezing as the sun sets. Officer Travis Holloway was patrolling State Route 318, one of the most desolate highways in the United States. On this road, the chances of encountering another vehicle while driving are extremely low. Cell towers were 100 miles behind, and radio signals struggled against a void that created an endless feeling of absorption. Unit 74, this is dispatch. Ruby Delgado's voice crackled through the static, her usually clear transmission breaking up into fragments. We've got a situation at mile marker 214. Motorists called in about 30 minutes ago. Said they passed an abandoned vehicle, driver's door open, hazard still blinking. No one around that they could see. Holloway adjusted his radio, trying to clear the interference that always plagued this section of his patrol road. The dashboard clock showed 11:51 p.m., and he calculated the distance in his head. Mile marker 214 was about 23 miles from his current position. Deep in the stretch, locals called the Devil's Corridor, though no one could quite remember why it had earned that name. Some said it was because of the heat mirages that danced across the asphalt during summer days, creating illusions of water that had lured more than one desperate traveler to their death. Others claimed it was the way sound behaved out there, how voices could carry for miles or disappear entirely, how you could hear things that weren't there and miss things that were. Copy that, dispatch. I'm about 20 minutes out. Any details on the vehicle? Holloway accelerated slightly, his patrol car's headlights cutting through the darkness that pressed against the highway like a living thing. Out here, the darkness had weight, had presence. It wasn't just the absence of light, but something that actively pushed back against any attempt to illuminate it. Black or dark blue SUV, possibly a Tahoe or Suburban. Motorists didn't stop to investigate. Said something felt wrong about it. They're not from around here, just passing through from Salt Lake to Vegas. Ruby's voice faded in and out, and Holloway could hear her adjusting something on her end, probably trying to boost the signal. Travis, be careful out there. I'm having trouble maintaining consistent contact with units tonight. Something's interfering with the signals worse than usual. Holloway had been with the Nevada Highway Patrol for 8 years. All of them spent patrolling these remote stretches, where the desert stretched endlessly in every direction, where the night sky was so clear you could see satellites crossing overhead, and where help, if you needed it, was always at least an hour away. He'd seen plenty of abandoned vehicles in his time. Overheated engines, blown tires, families who'd underestimated the distance between gas stations. But something about this call was already setting off his instincts. That sixth sense that cops developed after years on the job, the one that whispered when something was about to go sideways. The miles rolled by in hypnotic monotony, his headlights revealing the same endless stretch of cracked asphalt, the same scraggly desert vegetation clinging to life in the sandy shoulders, the same infinite darkness beyond. The radio continued to pop and hiss with static, occasionally catching fragments of transmissions from other units so far away they might as well have been on another planet. At 10:08 a.m., his headlights caught the reflective numbers on a green highway sign, mile marker 2113. A minute later, he saw it. The SUV sat at an angle on the shoulder, its front end pointing slightly toward thigh in the desert, as if the driver had pulled over in a hurry or had lost control. The hazard lights were indeed still blinking, casting rhythmic amber pulses across the asphalt that seemed to emphasize the emptiness around them. As Holloway slowed his approach, his trained eye catalogued the details. Dark blue Chevrolet Tahoe Nevada plates, recent model, probably not more than 3 years old. The driver's door stood open, interior dome light still on, casting a weak glow that barely penetrated the surrounding darkness. He pulled up behind the vehicle, positioning his patrol car at the proper angle to provide cover if needed, and radioed his position to dispatch. The response was mostly static. With Ruby's voice barely audible underneath the interference, he tried twice more before giving up, making a mental note to log the communication failure in his report. Out here, you learn to work with equipment failures as much as you worked with the equipment itself. Holloway stepped out of his patrol car, the cold desert air hitting him like a physical presence. The temperature had to be in the low 30s, maybe colder, and the wind that swept across the flat expanse carried with it the scent of sage and something else, something metallic that he couldn't quite place. He approached the SUV carefully, his flashlight beam sweeping the interior through the open door. The keys were still in the ignition, engine off but electronics still running. A cell phone lay on the passenger seat, screen dark. In the back, secured in a car seat, was a child's backpack, pink with unicorn decorations, looking impossibly out of place in the harsh reality of the desert night. The inside of the vehicle told a story of sudden departure. A coffee cup sat in the center console, still half full, the liquid cold to the touch when Holloway tested it with his finger. A woman's purse had spilled across the passenger side floor, its contents scattered. Lipstick, wallet, a small notebook, several receipts from gas stations and fast food restaurants along Interstate 15, but no signs of violence. No blood, no indication of a struggle, just absence, as if the occupants had simply evaporated into the desert air. Holloway circled the vehicle, his flashlight beam probing the darkness beyond the shoulder. The desert here was relatively flat, scattered with low scrub brush and the occasional Joshua tree, their twisted forms looking even more alien in the harsh white light. About 20 FT from the road, his light caught something that made him pause. Footprints in the sandy soil, fresh ones based on the sharp edges that hadn't yet been softened by wind. Adult-sized, probably women's based on the narrow shape and smaller size, leading away from the vehicle in a roughly straight line toward the desert. He followed the tracks with his flashlight beam as far as the light would reach, noting how they seemed steady, purposeful, not the wandering path of someone lost or confused. But why would someone leave their vehicle, leave their child's belongings and walk into the desert in the middle of the night? The nearest anything was 50 mir in any direction. Nothing but military restricted zones and abandoned mining camps from the 1950s, when uranium fever had briefly brought life to this desolate region. Returning to his patrol car, Holloway grabbed his portable radio, hoping for better reception than the car unit. "Dispatch, this is Unit 74 at mile marker 214. I've got an abandoned Tahoe, Nevada plates." He squinted at the plate in his flashlight beam. "Nancy Victor 7482. No occupants present, but personal belongings still in vehicle, including a child's backpack. I've got footprints leading into the desert. Requesting backup for search and possibly K9. Something else caught his attention as he examined the back seat more carefully. The child's car seat was properly secured, but the straps were unbuckled and hanging loose, as if the child had been removed in a hurry. But removed by whom? The footprints he'd seen were single file. One person walking, not someone carrying a child. He checked the ground around that side of the vehicle and found more prints, smaller ones, child-sized, also heading in the same direction as the adult tracks. So a woman and a child had left the vehicle voluntarily, walking into the desert. But why? What could have compelled them to abandon the relative safety of their car for the hostile environment of the high desert at night? The temperature was dropping steadily. Without proper clothing, hypothermia would set in within hours. And that was assuming they didn't encounter any of the other dangers the desert offered. Rattlesnakes, though less active in the cold, abandoned mine shafts that dotted the landscape like trapdoor, or simply the vast expanse itself that could swallow a person without a trace. Holloway stood at the edge of the asphalt, where civilization ended, and the wild began, and swept his tactical flashlight across the desert. The beam was powerful, but the darkness seemed to eat it, absorbing the light after a few hundred feet, as if the photons themselves got tired of fighting against the emptiness. The footprints led straight out, no deviation, no hesitation, as if the woman had known exactly where she was going. But there was nothing out there, nothing for 50 mir except desert and death. He took his first steps off the road, his boots crunching on the grolly soil. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the silence, as if the desert was listening, paying attention to this intrusion into its domain. 20 feet from the road, the footprints remained clear and purposeful. 50 feet out, they continued straight, though he noticed something odd. There were no backward glances, no places where the walkers had stopped to look back at their vehicle, at the road, at civilization. People lost or confused always looked back, always second-guessed themselves. These tracks showed none of that hesitation. 100 FT from the road, Holloway paused and looked back. His patrol car seemed impossibly far away, its emergency lights painting red and blue streaks across the asphalt that looked like wounds in the darkness. The SUV sat silent, its hazard lights still blinking, that steady rhythm that was beginning to feel like a countdown to something he didn't understand. He could no longer hear the electrical hum of the vehicles, couldn't hear anything except his own breathing and the soft whisper of wind through the sagebrush. The tracks continued, and so did he. 200 FT from the road, the texture of the ground began to change, becoming sear, making the footprints deeper and more defined. He could see where the woman had been walking with purpose, her stride steady and consistent. The child's prints were alongside now, not behind, as if they had been walking hand in hand. There was something almost peaceful about the tracks. No signs of dragging, no indication that either walker had been forced or coerced. 300 FT out, Holloway's flashlight beam caught something that made him stop. The tracks led directly to what looked like a dry creek bed, what the locals called a wash, carved by the rare but violent thunderstorms that occasionally swept through the desert. The wash was maybe 6 FT deep and 12 FT wide. Its sandy bottom churned up as if water had run through it recently, but that was impossible. There hadn't been rain in this area for months, and when Holloway checked the sandy walls of the wash, they were bone dry, showing no signs of recent water flow. The tracks led down into the wash and disappeared. Not gradually, not fading out, but simply stopped as if the walkers had vanished mid-stride. Holloway climbed down carefully, his flashlight probing every shadow, every crevice. The sandy bottom showed signs of disturbance, but no clear prints, no indication of which direction the woman and child had gone. It was as if they had walked into the wash and simply ceased to exist. He stood in the bottom of the dry creek bed, turning in a slow circle, his flashlight beam sweeping the walls. On the eastern wall, about 4 up, he noticed something odd. Scratches in the sandstone too regular to be natural weathering. Moving closer, he could see they were symbols or markings of some kind, but not anything he recognized. They looked fresh, the edges sharp and defined, as if carved recently. Below the symbols, the sand had been disturbed in a pattern that suggested someone had been digging or searching for something. A sound made him freeze, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon. It had been faint, carried on the wind, but it had sounded like a child's voice, high and thin, calling out. He stood perfectly still, straining his ears against the silence. There it was again, coming from somewhere ahead, deeper in the desert. Without hesitation, he climbed out of the wash on the far side and continued forward, following the sound. The terrain became rougher, scattered with larger rocks and deeper gullies. His GPS unit had completely given up, showing his location as anywhere from where he actually was to somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The compass on his watch was spinning lazily, unable to find magnetic north. But the voice continued, intermittent but clear enough to follow, always just at the edge of hearing, always just a little farther ahead. 400 yards from the road, maybe 500. It was hard to tell in the darkness. Holloway came across something that stopped him cold. In a small clearing among the Joshua trees and sage, someone had built what looked like a campsite, but not a normal campsite. This was something else. Something that raised every hair on the back of his neck. Arranged in a perfect circle were children's toys, dolls, stuffed animals, toy cars, all of them positioned as if they were having a tea party or playing some kind of game. In the center of the circle was a child's car seat, the same model as the one in the SUV, but older, weathered, as if it had been out here for years. The toys weren't dusty or sun-bleached, as they should have been after exposure to the desert elements. They looked new, clean, as if someone maintained them regularly. As his flashlight beam moved across them, Holloway noticed that each toy had something attached to it, a small piece of paper tied with string. He knelt beside the nearest one, a stuffed rabbit, and carefully removed the paper. Written in neat, childlike handwriting was a name and a date. Sophie Garcia, March 15th, 2019. His blood ran cold. He knew that name, that date. Every cop in Nevada knew about Sophie Garcia, the 6-year-old who had disappeared with her mother while driving through the desert 5 years ago. Their car had been found abandoned at mile marker 237, 23 miles from here. No bodies were ever recovered, no trace of where they had gone. The case had gone cold, filed away with all the other mysteries the desert kept. Holloway checked another toy, a wooden truck painted red. Marcus Delgado, August the 2nd, 2021. Another missing child. Another abandoned vehicle. Another mystery without resolution. As he moved through the circle, checking each toy, each name, a pattern emerged. All missing children. All disappeared along this stretch of highway. All cases that had never been solved. 12 toys, 12 names, 12 children who had vanished into the desert over the past decade. The child's voice came again, clearer now, and Holloway realized with a start that it was coming from multiple directions, as if several children were calling out from different points in the darkness. But the voices were wrong somehow, distorted, like recordings played at slightly the wrong speed. And underneath them, barely audible, was something else, an adult voice, female, humming what sounded like a lullaby. Holloway stood in the center of the macabre display, his mind racing to process what he was seeing. The toys continued their silent vigil, positioned with such care that it was clear someone visited this place regularly, maintained it, treated it as something sacred or significant. He photographed the scene quickly with his phone, though he doubted the pictures would turn out in this darkness, and marked the GPS coordinates, even though the device was still malfunctioning. Moving toward the sound of humming, Holloway noticed the terrain was changing. The sandy soil gave way to a harder surface, almost like weathered concrete. His flashlight revealed what looked like an old road, not paved, but compressed earth that had been traveled enough to become permanent. The road wasn't on any map he knew, wasn't supposed to exist. This entire area was supposedly untouched desert, had been since the military abandoned their testing facilities in the 1960s. The humming stopped abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind that made you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the rush of blood in your ears. Holloway stopped, waiting, listening. Then he heard it. Footsteps, light and quick, running across the hard-packed earth ahead. Not away from him, but parallel to his position, as if someone was circling him. "Amanda Morrison," he called out, his voice sounding strange in the thick silence. "This is Officer Holloway with the Nevada Highway Patrol. Are you hurt? Is your daughter with you?" The footsteps stopped. Then from somewhere to his left, a woman's voice, clear but distant. "She said you'd come. She said someone always comes. Ma'am, I'm here to help. Are you injured? Is your daughter safe?" A laugh, but not a happy sound. It was the laugh of someone who had discovered a cosmic joke that wasn't funny, but was too big not to acknowledge. "Safe? Nothing's safe here. Nothing's ever been safe here. But she takes care of them, you know. She takes such good care of them." Holloway moved toward the voice, his flashlight beam sweeping the darkness. "Who takes care of them, Amanda? Who are you talking about?" "The mother," the voice replied. And now it was closer, maybe 50 FT away. She lost her baby here years and years ago. Before the highway, before the military, before any of us, she's been looking for her baby ever since. But she gets confused, you see. She thinks all the children are hers. A figure emerged at the edge of his flashlight beam. A woman matching the photo from the SUV, disheveled, but apparently unharmed. She was alone, no child visible, and her eyes had the glazed look of shock or extreme stress. She was wearing only a light jacket over jeans and a t-shirt, inadequate for the cold, and she was shivering violently. "Amanda, where's your daughter? Where's Holloway?" Realized he didn't know the child's name. "Lily," Amanda supplied, her voice dreamy, disconnected. "Her name is Lily. She's with the others now, playing with the others." She gestured vaguely behind her toward the darkness. "The mother likes it when they play together. She says it reminds her of how things used to be." Holloway approached slowly, his hand extended in a calming gesture. "Amanda, I need you to focus. Where exactly is Lily? I need to get both of you back to safety." Amanda's eyes seemed to focus for a moment, clarity breaking through whatever fog had settled over her mind. "You don't understand. She won't let them go. She can't let them go. They're all she has now, all she's ever had since." She trailed off, looking past Holloway toward the circle of toys. "Oh, you found her collection. She'll add Lily's toy soon. She always does. Amanda, who is she? Is there someone else out here?" Before Amanda could answer, a child's giggle echoed through the darkness. followed by another, then another, until it sounded like a playground full of invisible children. But the sound was wrong. It had an echo to it, a hollow quality, like it was coming from underground. Holloway's flashlight beam whipped around, searching for the source, but there was nothing but empty desert and the oppressive darkness that seemed to press closer with each passing moment. "They're in the old facility," Amanda said suddenly, as if remembering something important. "The underground part. That's where she keeps them, where she plays with them. But you can't go there. No one who goes there comes back the same. Some don't come back at all." "What facility?" Holloway demanded. But Amanda was backing away, shaking her head. "I tried to get Lily, I tried, but the mother, she's not human anymore." "Maybe she never was. Maybe the desert changed her. Or maybe she changed the desert. But she won't let Lily go. Won't let any of them go." Tears were streaming down Amanda's face now. She showed me the others. "Some have been there for years. They don't age, don't grow, just play and play and play in the dark." Holloway reached for Amanda's arm, intending to secure her and get her back to his patrol car, but she jerked away with surprising strength. "No, I have to go back. I promised I'd come back. She said if I bring another child, she'll let Lily go. One trade, that's all. Just one trade." The full horror of what Amanda was saying hit Holloway like a physical blow. "Amanda, listen to me. There's no one out here. You're suffering from exposure, possibly dehydration. Your daughter is probably scared and hiding somewhere. We need to organize a proper search." His words were cut off by a sound that made his blood freeze. Dozens of children's voices all calling out at once. "Come play with us. Come play with us." But underneath the words was something else. A deeper voice, ancient and patient and utterly inhuman, speaking in a language that predated words, that spoke directly to the primitive parts of the brain that recognized predators in the dark. Amanda screamed and ran, not toward the road but deeper into the desert. Holloway pursued, his boots pounding on the hard-packed earth of the hidden road. His flashlight beam bounced wildly as he ran, catching glimpses of Amanda's form ahead, always just at the edge of the light. The children's voices followed them, seemed to surround them, coming from above and below and all sides at once. The road led to what looked like a small hill, but as Holloway got closer, he realized it was artificial. A mound of earth covering something beneath. Set into the side of the mound was a metal door, military style, heavy and rusted, but standing open. Amanda disappeared through it without hesitation, and Holloway followed, his training screaming at him that this was a trap, that he should wait for backup, that entering an unknown underground structure alone was suicide. The beam of his flashlight revealed a concrete corridor sloping downward, walls sweating with condensation, despite the desert climate above. The air was thick, musty, with an underlying sweet smell like overripe fruit. Emergency lighting strips along the walls provided a dim green glow, though they shouldn't have been functioning after decades of abandonment. Holloway could hear Amanda's footsteps ahead, echoing off the walls, leading him deeper. The corridor opened into a larger space, and Holloway stopped, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. It was some kind of control room filled with equipment that looked like it belonged in a 1950s science fiction movie. Banks of switches, reel-to tape machines, oscilloscopes showing impossible waveforms. But that wasn't what made him freeze. It was the children. They stood in perfectly straight rows like students at an assembly, all facing the same direction. There were at least 20 of them, ranging in age from perhaps 4 to 12. Do you know how long 20 minutes is in the dark? How long when you're alone with your fears? When the children are calling? The lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed everything. A darkness so absolute that Holloway couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. His flashlight was dead, wouldn't even flicker. And in that darkness he heard them. Hundreds of children's voices, all calling his name, all asking him to play, all promising that it would be fun, that he'd never have to leave, never have to grow old, never have to face the harsh realities of the world above. Something touched his arm, small fingers cold as ice, then another touch and another. The children were moving in the dark, surrounding him, their touches light but insistent. He tried to push through them to find the exit, but he'd lost all sense of direction. The voices grew louder, more insistent, and underneath them that ancient voice speaking in tongues that bypassed the ear and went straight to the spine. Travis. It was Amanda's voice, but different, hollow. It's easier if you don't fight. The children need someone to watch over them. She can't do it alone anymore. She's so tired. So very tired. She's been here so long, waiting, searching, collecting. But she needs help now. Someone with authority. Someone people trust. Holloway fumbled for his radio, pressing the transmit button. "Ruby, I need backup now. There are children here. At least 20 children in some kind of underground facility north of Myliaka." The radio died mid-transmission. In the darkness, he heard laughter. Not joyful, but triumphant. The woman thing's voice echoed from every direction. "They won't find you. They never find anyone who comes this deep. The desert keeps its secrets. But don't worry, you won't be alone. You'll have the children. Forever and ever and ever." The darkness was absolute, but Holloway's other senses sharpened to compensate. He could hear the shuffle of small feet on concrete, smell that sickly sweet scent growing stronger, feel the air growing thicker, harder to breathe. His hand found the wall, cold and damp concrete, and he began moving along it, trying to find the entrance he'd come through. But the wall seemed to curve impossibly, leading him in circles or spirals. The geometry of the space no longer making sense. "Stop fighting." Amanda's voice came from somewhere nearby. "I fought too at first, but she showed me things. Officers showed me the truth about this place, about what happened here. The military didn't abandon this facility because of budget cuts. They abandoned it because of her, because of what they created." "Created?" Holloway's voice was, his throat dry despite the humid air. "They were experimenting," Amanda continued, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. "Back in the 50s, when everyone was afraid of the Russians, afraid of nuclear war, they wanted to create the perfect survivor. Someone who could withstand radiation, who could live underground indefinitely, who could preserve human culture after the apocalypse. They brought volunteers here, families who were told they were participating in civil defense drills." The darkness seemed to pulse around Holloway as Amanda spoke, as if the walls themselves were breathing. But the experiments went wrong. The radiation didn't kill them, but it changed them. The children changed first. They stopped aging, stopped growing. And the mother, Subject Zero they called her, she changed most of all. She became something between life and death, between human and something else. "That's impossible," Holloway said. But even as he spoke, he remembered the reports he'd read, the classified documents that occasionally surfaced about military experiments in the Nevada desert. Projects with innocuous names that hid horrors beneath. A light suddenly flickered on. Not the harsh fluorescent of the emergency strips, but a soft, warm glow like candlelight. It illuminated a small section of the room, and Holloway saw her clearly for the first time. The woman thing sat in what had once been an observation chair, surrounded by monitors that showed static. But in the static, if you looked long enough, you could see patterns. Faces of children playing, laughing, frozen in moments of joy. "They tried to kill us," she said, her multiple voices harmonizing in a discordant symphony, when they realized what they'd created. "They sealed the facility, pumped in gas, tried to burn us out. But we didn't die. We couldn't die." The children cried for so long. Cried for their parents, for food, for water, for light. But I kept them safe, kept them together. And when the crying stopped, when they finally understood that no one was coming for them, they began to play. She stood, moving with that unnatural grace, and the lights followed her, maintaining that small circle of illumination. "The desert remembers everything, Officer Holloway. Every secret buried in its sands, every lie told under its sun, every life lost to its emptiness, and I am part of the desert now. We all are." The children began to move into the light one by one, and Holloway saw that Amanda had been right. They were from different eras. Some wore clothing from the 1950s, others from the 70s and recent years. Their faces were peaceful, serene even, but their eyes were wrong. Too old for their young faces, holding knowledge that children shouldn't possess. "Lay!" Amanda suddenly cried out, and a small girl separated from the group, running to her mother. But when they embraced, Holloway saw something that made his stomach turn. Lily's form seemed to flicker like a TV with bad reception, solid one moment and translucent the next. "She's becoming like us," the woman thing explained. "A few more hours and the transformation will be complete. Then she'll never leave, never grow old, never suffer the pains of adulthood. Isn't that what every parent wants, to keep their children young and innocent forever?" Holloway's hand found his service weapon. Though he knew it would be useless here, these children have families. Parents who were searching for them, who never stopped searching. Families who drove through the desert and lost them, she counted. Who stopped for gas, for food, for rest, and found their children gone. Who searched and called and cried, but the desert had already claimed them. I didn't take them. The desert gave them to me. Every child who disappears in this wasteland, every family broken by loss, they all become part of my collection. But why, Holloway asked. Why keep them? The woman thing's expression changed, and for a moment he saw something almost human in those black eyes. Grief, loneliness, a pain so deep it had transformed into something else entirely. Because I lost my baby, my real baby before all of this. She wandered into the desert while I was sleeping, exhausted from the journey west, seeking a better life in California. I searched for 3 days until my feet bled, until my voice was gone from calling her name. The desert took her, swallowed her whole. And when the military came, offering money for volunteers, offering a chance to be part of something important, I thought maybe I could find her in their underground world. She moved closer to Holloway, and he felt the temperature drop even more. Frost formed on his eyebrows, his breath coming out in clouds. But they made me into this instead, a mother without a child, a protector without purpose. So I gave myself a new purpose. Every child lost in this desert, I save them. I keep them from the heat, the cold, the predators, the endless nothing that swallows everything. They're all my babies now, all of them forever. Officer Holloway, it was Ruby's voice crackling through his radio, which had somehow come back to life. We've got units converging on your position. There's something you need to know. We've been checking the records. There's no facility at your coordinates. No military base, no underground structure. According to everything we have, you're standing in empty desert. The woman thing smiled. Of course, there's no facility. Not anymore. Not in your world. We exist in the between spaces, the gaps in reality that the desert creates. We're here and not here. Real and not real. The children who come to play with us, they slip through the cracks. And now you're slipping. But Holloway wasn't listening anymore. He was thinking about the patterns he'd noticed. The abandoned vehicles always at mile markers, the consistent distance between disappearance sites, the way the footprints always led in the same general direction. This wasn't random. There was a logic to it, a set of rules that governed how this thing operated. You can only take them at certain points, he said suddenly. The mile markers, they're not random. They're where the barrier is weakest, where your reality touches ours. The woman think's expression changed, became wary. You're observant, but knowledge won't save you. Maybe not, Holloway agreed. But it might save them. He turned to Amanda, who was still holding Lily's flickering form. Amanda, the mile markers, she can only manifest at specific mile markers. That's why your car broke down where it did. She made it happen. But it also means she has limits, boundaries. Stop talking, the woman thing commanded, her multiple voices taking on a dangerous edge. But Holloway continued, 23 miles between each incident point. It's not random. It's a pattern. Every 23 miles, there's a weak point where she can reach through. And if there's a pattern, there's a way to break it. The children began to agitate, their serene expressions cracking to reveal something desperate underneath. They reached out toward Holloway, their hands becoming solid, grasping, pulling at his uniform. Play with us, they chorused. But now it sounded like a plea rather than a demand. Please play with us. We're so lonely. We're so cold. That's it, isn't it? Holloway said, understanding, flooding through him. They're not happy. They're trapped. You're not saving them. You're imprisoning them. They want to leave but can't because you won't let them go. The woman thing rose to her full impossible height. Her form shifting and changing, becoming less human with each second. They are mine. The voice shook the walls, caused dust to rain from the ceiling. The desert gave them to me. They are all I have. Holloway felt in his pocket and found his emergency flares. A wild idea formed in his mind. Fire. The one thing that had always held back the darkness, the one constant human tool against the unknown. He struck the flare and brilliant red light exploded through the space. The children screamed and retreated, their forms becoming more translucent. The woman thing shrieked, a sound that was nothing like human vocalization, more like metal tearing. Fire, Amanda breathed. They tried to burn the facility. That's why she fears it. Holloway struck another flare, then another, throwing them into different corners of the room. The red light revealed the true nature of the space, not a military facility, but something organic, grown rather than built. The walls pulsed with veins of some dark substance, and the floor was soft, yielding like flesh. They weren't in a building at all. They were inside something alive, something that had grown in the deep places beneath the desert. "Run!" Holloway shouted to Amanda. "Take Lily and run!" Amanda didn't need to be told twice. Clutching her daughter, whose form was solidifying in the flare light, she ran toward where the entrance had been. Holloway followed, striking more flares, leaving a trail of fire behind him. The woman thing pursued, her form now completely inhuman. A writhing mass of shadows and desperate hunger, reaching out with appendages that weren't quite arms, weren't quite tentacles, weren't quite anything that belonged in the rational world. The corridor was collapsing, or maybe digesting. The walls were closing in, trying to trap them, but the flare light seemed to hurt it, causing it to recoil. Holloway could see stars through gaps that appeared in the ceiling, flesh, could smell the clean desert air, mixing with the rotting sweetness of this place. They burst through what had been the metal door, but was now more like a sphincter of organic material, sprawling onto the cold desert sand. Holloway immediately struck his last flare and threw it back through the opening. The thing that had been pursuing them stopped at the threshold, unable or unwilling to follow into the world of natural light and open spaces. "This isn't over," the woman thing said, her voices echoing from the depths. "The desert is patient. The children will always be here waiting, playing, and one day you'll come back. They always come back." The opening began to close, the mound of earth settling, becoming just another hill in the endless desert landscape. Holloway grabbed Amanda and Lily and they ran, stumbling through the darkness toward the distant lights of the emergency vehicles that were now visible on the highway. Behind them, carried on the wind, came the sound of children singing, a lullaby in a minor key that would haunt Holloway's dreams for the rest of his life. The emergency vehicles had formed a semicircle on the highway, their lights turning the desert into a harsh landscape of red and blue. Holloway stumbled into the light, Amanda and Lily beside him, all three of them covered in dust and something else, a substance that looked like ash but felt organic, alive. Paramedics rushed forward, wrapping them in thermal blankets, checking vitals, asking rapid-fire questions that Holloway couldn't quite process yet. "Jesus Christ, Travis," Sergeant Mike Rosen said, approaching with a mix of relief and concern on his weathered face. "You've been gone for 4 hours. Your last transmission put you 500 yards from the road, but we've been searching that area for the past 2 hours. There's nothing there but desert." 4 hours. It had felt like less than 1, maybe 2 at most. Holloway looked at his watch and saw that it had stopped at 12:47 a.m., the exact moment he'd entered the underground space. "The facility," he said, his voice. "There's an underground facility. Military from the 1950s. There are children there, Mike, 20 of them, maybe more." Rosen exchanged glances with the other officers. "Travis, we've been over every inch of ground out there. Brought in ground-penetrating radar, the works. There's no facility, no underground anything, except solid bedrock starting about 10 F down. That's impossible." Holloway turned to Amanda for confirmation, but she was focused entirely on Lily, holding her daughter as if she might disappear at any moment. The girl seemed solid enough now, but there was something different about her. Her eyes had that thousand-y stare that soldiers got after too much combat, too much exposure to things that shouldn't exist. "Ma'am," Rosen addressed Amanda, "can you tell us what happened? Where have you been for the past 4 hours?" Amanda looked up, her expression confused. 4 hours? We were only gone. It felt like days, maybe weeks. Time didn't work right there. The sun never rose, but it was never fully dark either. Just that green light, always that green light. "Where?" Rose impressed. "Where exactly were you?" "The place where the lost children play," Lily said suddenly, her voice small but clear. "The mother keeps them there where they can play forever and ever. She said I could stay too, be with the other children, but Mommy came for me. And then the officer came and made fire, and the mother got scared." The paramedics exchanged concerned looks. One of them, a young woman named Garcia, pulled Rosen aside. "Sergeant, they're all showing signs of severe hypothermia, but it's not consistent with the ambient temperature or the time they were exposed. Their core temps are way lower than they should be, like they've been in sub-zero conditions for hours. And there's something else," another paramedic added. "The residue on their clothes and skin, I've never seen anything like it. It's organic, but it doesn't match any biological matter I'm familiar with. We need to get them to the hospital, run some tests. Holloway grabbed Rosen's arm. Mike, I know how this sounds, but those missing kids, Sophie Garcia, Marcus Delgado, all of them, they're out there. They're not dead. They're trapped in some kind of, I don't know what to call it. All three of you do. As the paramedics loaded them into ambulances, Holloway saw Ruby Delgado standing by one of the patrol cars. Her expression troubled. She caught his eye and walked over. Travis, there's something you should know. When you were radio silent, I did some digging into the history of this area. There was a military installation here in the 1950s, Project Preservation. But according to the records, it was just a supply depot. Nothing underground. But Holloway could hear the hesitation in her voice. But I found some newspaper articles from 1958. The whole family went missing. The Carters. They were civilian contractors working at the depot. Mother, father, and 3 children. They were never found, but there were rumors. People saying they heard children playing in the desert at night, seeing lights where there shouldn't be any. The military shut down the depot shortly after and classified all the records. The mother, Holloway said. She said she lost her baby before the experiments. What if she was Mrs. Carter? What if the whole family was subjected to whatever they were doing out here? Ruby shook her head. That was almost 70 years ago, Travis. Even if something happened to them, they couldn't still be alive. They're not alive, Amanda said from her gurney. She'd been listening to the conversation. Not exactly. They're something else now. Something the desert made them into, or something they made themselves into to survive. But they're real. The children are real and they're still out there, still playing, still waiting for someone to find them and take them home. The ambulance doors closed, and as they drove toward the hospital in Ellerly, Holloway watched the desert pass by through the small window. In the darkness, he could swear he saw lights moving parallel to the road, keeping pace with the ambulance. Lights that shouldn't exist in places where no one should be. At the hospital, the tests revealed anomalies that the doctors couldn't explain. All 3 of them had trace amounts of an unknown isotope in their blood, something that didn't match any known radioactive signature. Their body temperatures remained unstable for days, dropping to dangerous levels without warning, and all 3 reported the same recurring dream. Children playing in an endless twilight, calling out for their parents, for anyone to come and take them home. The official investigation found nothing. The toy circle Holloway had described didn't exist when search teams reached the coordinates. The underground facility remained unfindable, despite extensive searching with ground-penetrating radar and even exploratory drilling. The only physical evidence was the organic residue on their clothes, which defied all attempts at identification before eventually degrading into base carbon components that told nothing of its origin. Holloway was placed on administrative leave pending psychological evaluation. The department psychologist, Dr. Patricia Hoffman, listened to his story with professional neutrality, making notes about trauma-induced hallucinations and the effects of isolation in extreme environments. But after their 3rd session, she pulled him aside privately. "Off the record, Officer Holloway," she said, her voice low. "My daughter disappeared on Highway 318 15 years ago. Car broke down. She went for help. Never came back. They never found a body. Never found anything except her shoe sitting in the middle of the road like it had been placed there. Sometimes on quiet nights, I dream I can hear her calling for me. She sounds exactly the same as she did then, 7 years old, scared, wanting her mommy." "You believe me," Holloway said, "not a question, but a statement." "I believe something happens out there that we don't understand. Something that takes people, especially children, and doesn't give them back. Not fully, anyway." She paused, seeming to wrestle with what she was about to say. "The dreams you're having, they're not going to stop. Amanda Morrison has already reported that Lily is having episodes where she seems to fade, become translucent. The doctors can't explain it. They're saying it's a psychological condition, a trauma response. But you and I both know better. What can we do?" Holloway asked. "How do we help those kids?" Dr. Hoffman shook her head. "I don't know if we can. Maybe they're beyond help. Maybe they've become part of something so fundamentally different from our reality that bringing them back would be impossible, even cruel. But we can remember them. We can make sure their families know they weren't abandoned, weren't forgotten." Holloway returned to duty 3 weeks later. But he never drove Highway 318 again. The department quietly reassigned him to a different patrol area, closer to the city, where the lights of civilization kept the darkness at bay. But on quiet nights, when the radio static grew thick and the desert wind carried sounds that shouldn't exist, he could still hear them. The children playing in the dark, the mother singing her twisted lullabies, and underneath it all the patient breathing of something vast and hungry that waited in the spaces between reality. Amanda Morrison and Lily relocated to California, as far from the desert as they could get. But Lily never fully returned from wherever she had been. She would stand at windows for hours staring at nothing, and sometimes Amanda would find her talking to children who weren't there, making plans to play games that didn't exist. The doctors called it a dissociative disorder, prescribed medications that didn't help, recommended therapies that couldn't reach the real problem. 6 months after the incident, Officer Holloway received a package at his home. No return address, no postmark, just his name written in childish handwriting on brown paper. Inside was a toy, a small police car, the kind you might find at any dollar store. Attached was a piece of paper with a name and date. Travis Holloway, October 12, 2023. The date he had entered the underground space, the date he had almost become part of the collection. He drove out to Highway 318 one last time, not on duty but in his personal vehicle. He stopped at mile marker 214, where it had all started. The SUV was gone, of course, towed away months ago. But there in the desert, just visible in his headlights, was a circle of toys more than before. He counted 37 of them, each with a name tag, each representing a lost soul that the desert had claimed. In the center was a new addition, a pink backpack with unicorn decorations, Lily's backpack from the abandoned SUV. But the name on the tag wasn't Lily Morrison. It was Sarah Mitchell, June 8, 2024. A future date, a child who hadn't gone missing yet. A prophecy or a promise, Holloway couldn't tell which. He got back in his car and drove away, but not before seeing them one last time in his rearview mirror. Translucent figures of children standing in a row along the highway, waving goodbye or perhaps waving him back. In the middle of them stood the tall figure of the mother, her impossible form wavering between human and something else, between protector and predator, between savior and captor. The next morning, Holloway submitted his resignation from the Nevada Highway Patrol. He moved to Oregon, got a job in private security, tried to forget, but every time a child went missing, every time an Amber Alert lit up his phone, he wondered if they had found their way to that dark place beneath the desert, if they were playing now with the others, if they were calling out for someone to come and take them home. The desert keeps its secrets, but sometimes in the deep of night, when the world is quiet and the darkness presses close, those secrets whisper back. They tell of children who never grow old, of a mother who never stopped searching, and of a place between worlds where the lost are found but never saved. They tell of Officer Travis Holloway, who went into the dark and came back changed, who knew the truth but could never prove it, who saved 2 souls but left dozens behind. Mile marker 214 still stands on Highway 318, just another green sign on an endless stretch of asphalt. Motorists pass it every day, never knowing what lies beneath, what waits in the spaces between. But sometimes, just sometimes, a car breaks down at that exact spot. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone hears the children playing in the desert. And sometimes they follow the sound. The Nevada Highway Patrol has a protocol now, unofficial but understood. 3 years later, a documentary crew investigating missing persons cases along Highway 318 requested an interview with Holloway. He declined but sent them a single message. Some doors once opened can never be fully closed. Some truths once learned can never be forgotten. The children are still there. They'll always be there. And one day when the desert decides it's time, they'll come home. All of them. God help us when they do. The documentary was never completed. The cruise van was found abandoned at mile marker 237, 23 mi from marker 214. Their equipment was still recording, capturing 4 hours of static, interrupted by what sounded like children singing. The crew members were found 3 days later, walking along the highway, unable to explain where they had been. They had no memory of the missing time, but all of them reported the same recurring dream. A tall woman with 2 long limbs standing in a circle of toys, calling them to come and play. The desert remembers everything, every secret, every loss, every soul that wanders too far from the light. And in the deep places, in the spaces between what is and what shouldn't be, the children play on forever and ever and ever. Some nights when the wind is just right and the darkness is complete, you can still hear them. The phantom sounds carry across the desert, reaching the small towns and isolated homes scattered throughout Nevada. People close their windows, turn up their televisions, pretend they don't hear, but they do. Everyone who lives near Highway 318 hears them eventually. The children who never came home playing in the dark, waiting for someone to join their endless game. The official investigation was closed, filed away with all the other mysteries that the desert holds. But Officer Travis Holloway knows the truth. Amanda Morrison knows. Lily, who still sometimes fades from view, who still talks to playmates no one else can see, knows most of all. The facility exists. The mother waits. The children play, and somewhere at mile marker 214, the door between worlds stands barely closed, held shut by nothing more than disbelief and the thin veneer of reality that separates the possible from the impossible. One day that door will open again. When it does, the desert will give up its secrets, and the world will learn that some mysteries are better left unsolved, some children are better left unfound, and some games should never be played. This is the true account of what happened on Highway 318 on the night of October 12, 2023. It is submitted here not as proof, for what proof could there be of something that officially never happened, but as a warning. If you find yourself driving through the Nevada desert at night, if your car breaks down near mile marker 214, if you hear children playing where no children should be, don't follow the sound. Don't look for the source. Don't try to help. Just get back in your car, lock the doors, and wait for dawn. Because the mother is always watching, always waiting, always ready to add to her collection. And the children trapped in their eternal game are always looking for new playmates. In the desert, in the dark, in the spaces between heartbeats they play on. Music. It was a Thursday night in early December. At 11:43 p.m. the call came in. Despite the scorching daytime heat of the Nevada desert, the night had cooled to the point where your breath was visible in the air. Senior Patrol Officer Dalton Reeve had been teaching Rookie Officer Jeremiah Sloan for 3 weeks the intricacies of patrolling the seemingly endless void that made up their jurisdiction. The jurisdiction consisted of 200 square miles of desert, abandoned settlements, and groups of people too stubborn or too poor to move to a more hospitable place. Unit 12. We've got a report of suspicious lights along the old power line service road, mile marker 17 off Highway 95. The dispatcher's voice crackled through their radio, competing with the ever-present static that plagued communications in this part of Nevada. Caller reports seeing vehicles and flashlights in an area that's supposed to be restricted. Possible illegal dumping activity. Reeve glanced at his rookie partner, who was already pulling up the location on their mobile data terminal. Sloan was 24, fresh out of the academy, all sharp edges and eager energy that hadn't yet been worn down by the reality of rural law enforcement. His uniform was still crisp despite 8 hours on patrol. His notebook filled with meticulous notes about every call they'd responded to. "That's the old Northern Electric Access Road," Reeve said, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years patrolling these roads. "Haven't been out there in maybe 6 months. Company abandoned that section of lines back in '08 when they rerouted through the valley. Nothing there now but rusted towers and tumbleweeds. Illegal dumping's been getting worse," Sloan observed, studying the map. "That hazmat case last month, where they found all those chemical drums near Goldfield. Different situation," Reeve corrected, turning their patrol unit north on Highway 95. "That was organized crime stuff. This is probably just locals dumping construction waste or old appliances. Maybe someone's running a meth cook and needed somewhere isolated to dump their waste." The drive to mile marker 17 took them away from the faint glow of civilization and into the true darkness of the high desert. Out here, the stars were so bright they cast shadows, and the only signs of human presence were the occasional reflective highway markers and the distant red blinking of aviation lights on mountain peaks. The patrol car's headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, revealing endless smiles of sagebrush and Joshua trees. "You know," Sloan said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over them. "I grew up in Vegas. Never really understood how dark it could get until I started this job. It's like the darkness has weight out here." Reeve nodded, appreciating the rookie's observation. Most city cops who transferred out here never adapted to the isolation, the vast emptiness that could swallow a person whole. But Sloan seemed to get it, understood that the desert was as much their partner as it was their adversary. They found the service road entrance easily enough, a gap in the fence line marked by a rusted gate that hung open, its chain cut years ago and never replaced. The road itself was barely distinguishable from the surrounding desert. Just two ruts worn by utility trucks that hadn't traveled this way in over a decade. Fresh tire tracks were visible in their headlights. Multiple sets, some appearing quite recent. Multiple vehicles, Sloan noted, leaning forward to study the tracks. Different tread patterns. This wasn't just one person dumping trash. Reeve felt the first prickle of unease. In his experience, illegal dumpers were solitary creatures working alone to avoid witnesses. Multiple vehicles suggested something more organized, more deliberate. He picked up the radio. "Dispatch Unit 12. We're at the service road entrance. Multiple vehicle tracks heading in. We're going to investigate. Road conditions are poor. Might lose radio contact in the valleys. Copy that, Unit 12. Be advised. No backup units available for at least 40 minutes. Closest unit is dealing with a domestic in Batty. Understood. We'll check in every 15 minutes if possible." Reeve turned onto the service road. The patrol car's suspension immediately protesting the rough surface. The road wound through a series of small valleys and ridges, following the path of the old power lines that marched across the landscape like metal skeletons. Every few hundred yards they passed another tower, the steel lottywork twisted by weather and time. Insulators shattered by target shooters or storms. 3 miles in, Sloan suddenly pointed ahead. "There, you see that?" Reeve saw it. A faint glow in the distance appearing and disappearing as the road curved. Not steady like a campfire or work lights, but intermittent moving. Flashlights maybe, or vehicle lights being turned on and off. We observe and document for now, Reeve decided. Get photos if you can. We'll need evidence for the EPA investigation. Sloan pulled out the camera with its telephoto lens, starting to document the scene below. But as he did, Reeve noticed something that made his blood run cold. One of the figures below had stopped moving and was looking directly up at their position. Even though they were in darkness, even though they were hundreds of yards away, the figure was staring right at them. The figure raised something, a radio or phone, and suddenly all activity below stopped. All 5 figures turned to look up at the ridge where the patrol car sat. Then, moving with practiced coordination, they began walking toward their vehicles. "They're leaving," Sloan said. "Should we intercept?" "Negative. 5 suspects probably armed, definitely organized. We wait for them to clear, then we document the dump site." But even as Reeve said it, he felt something was off. The figures below weren't hurrying, weren't panicking like criminals who'd been caught. They were moving with deliberate calm, almost casual. The vehicles below started up, headlights blazing to life. But instead of heading back the way they'd come toward the highway, they turned deeper into the valley, following a track Reeve hadn't even known existed. Within minutes, their lights had disappeared behind a ridge, leaving only darkness and the faint smell of diesel exhaust. "Come on," Reeve said, starting the patrol car. "Let's check the dump site before they circle back." They descended into the valley, headlights back on now that stealth was pointless. The spot where the vehicles had been parked was churned up with tire tracks, making it impossible to get good impressions. But near the rocks, they found what the suspects had been burying. 5 blue plastic barrels partially covered with dirt and rocks. Sloan approached with the camera, but Reeve held him back. "Don't get too close. We don't know what's in those barrels. Could be toxic. Could be explosive." That's when they heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the desert at night. It was a voice muffled but clearly human calling for help. It seemed to be coming from near the barrels. "Someone's here," Sloan said, immediately moving towards the sound. "Wait," Reeve commanded. But Sloan was already jogging toward this burial site. Reeve followed, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon. The voice grew clearer as they approached. Definitely human, definitely distressed, but something about it was wrong. It had a quality that Reeve couldn't quite identify, like it was coming through a speaker rather than from a person. Sloan reached the barrels first and stopped dead. "Dalton, you need to see this." Reeve joined him and immediately understood his partner's shock. Next to the barrels was a small electronic device, a digital recorder with a speaker attached, playing a loop of someone calling for help. The recording was high quality, convincing enough to fool anyone who wasn't looking directly at the device. "It's bait," Reeves said, the full implications hitting him. "This whole thing is bait." That's when they heard the engines. Multiple vehicles coming from different directions, converging on their location. Headlights appeared on the ridges surrounding the valley. At least 6 sets positioned to cut off every possible escape route. "Get to the car!" Reeves shouted. But even as they ran, he knew it was too late. The patrol car was 50 yards away, and the approaching vehicles were already moving to block the road. They made it to their unit, just as the first pickup truck crested the ridge behind them. Reeve threw the car into reverse, spinning around in a cloud of dust. But another vehicle appeared in front of them, its high beams blinding in the darkness. More lights appeared on either side, tightening the circle. Unit 12 requesting immediate backup. Sloan was shouting into the radio, but the only response was static. "Officer needs assistance." Multiple hostile vehicles. "They're jamming us," Reeve realized. This whole thing was planned. They wanted to draw a patrol unit out here. The vehicles had stopped now, forming a rough circle around the patrol car, their engines idling. Reeve counted at least 7 trucks and vans, all with their high beams on, creating a wall of blinding light. He couldn't see the drivers or passengers, couldn't tell how many people they were dealing with. "What do we do?" Sloan asked, his hand on his weapon. "We stay calm," Reeve said, though his own heart was racing. "We're law enforcement. They haven't actually done anything threatening yet. Could be they just want to scare us off." But even as he said it, he noticed something that made his stomach sink. Scattered across the service road, glinting in the headlights, were hundreds of broken glass fragments. They'd been spread deliberately, carefully to ensure that any vehicle trying to leave would blow its tires. This wasn't just a trap. It was a carefully prepared killing ground. The radio in their patrol car suddenly crackled to life, though not with dispatch. A voice distorted by electronic filtering spoke. "Officers, please step out of your vehicle. We need to have a conversation. Don't acknowledge," Reeve instructed Sloan. "We don't negotiate with Officer Dalton Reeve," the voice continued. 15 years with Nevada Highway Patrol. Wife Margaret. Daughter Ashley, currently a sophomore at UNR. Officer Jeremiah Sloan, 3 weeks out of academy. Parents David and Ruth live in Summerland. The personal information hit like a physical blow. These people had done their research, knew who they were dealing with. This wasn't random. They'd been specifically targeted. "You have 2 choices," the voice continued. "Step out of your vehicle and have a civilized discussion, or things become significantly less pleasant for everyone involved. You have 30 seconds to decide." Reeve's mind raced through their options. They couldn't drive out. The glass would shred their tires in seconds. They couldn't call for backup. The radios were jammed. They could stay in the vehicle, but that would only delay the inevitable. These people had planned this too carefully to not have contingencies. "Dalton," Sloan said quietly, "what the hell have we driven into?" Before Reeve could answer, one of the vehicles moved. A large truck with a reinforced front bumper accelerated toward them. Not fast enough to ram, but fast enough to make its intention clear. It stopped just feet from their rear bumper, boxing them in even more. 20 seconds, the voice said. "We get out," Reeve decided, "but we stay together. Keep our weapons holstered but accessible. These people went to a lot of trouble to get us here. They want something. Let's find out what." "This is insane," Sloan protested. "We can't just 10 seconds. Trust me, rookie. Sometimes the only way out is through. We get out, we assess, we survive. That's the only goal right now, survival." They opened their doors simultaneously, stepping out with their hands visible but not raised. The wall of headlights made it impossible to see anything beyond the circle of vehicles, but Reeve could sense people moving in the darkness beyond the lights. "Many people." "Very good," the electronic voice said. "Now walk forward toward the blue pickup truck at your 12 view." Reeve and Sloan moved forward slowly, their boots crunching on the broken glass. As they got closer to the ring of vehicles, figures became visible in the shadows. At least a dozen people, all wearing dark clothing, faces covered with masks or bandanas. Reeve and Sloan remained standing. The man sighed, the electronic distortion making it sound like static. "Officers, you're surrounded by 16 armed individuals in a location where no one can hear you scream and your radios don't work. I'm trying to be civilized about this, But I can just as easily have this conversation with you zip-tied and gagged in the back of a van. Your choice. Reeve sat first, giving Sloan a look that said to follow his lead. The rookie sat reluctantly, his hand never straying far from his weapon. Better, the man said. He began pacing in front of them, his boots crunching on the broken glass. Let me tell you a story, officers. 6 months ago, a transport truck crashed on Highway 95 about 40 mi from here. Official reports said it was carrying agricultural equipment. Do you remember that incident, Officer Reeve? Reeve did remember. It had been a major response. Multiple agencies involved. The highway closed for hours. But the details had been strangely sparse. The scene controlled by federal authorities, who'd pushed local law enforcement to the periphery. I remember, Reeve said carefully. Of course you do. Big federal response for a truck full of farming equipment, wasn't it? Hazmat teams, FBI, even some military vehicles. All for some tractors and plows. The man stopped pacing, facing them directly. Except it wasn't agricultural equipment. It was something else entirely, something that certain parties very much wanted to disappear. If you're talking about some conspiracy theory, as Sloan started, not a theory, the man interrupted. Fact. That truck was carrying decommissioned military equipment from the Tonopod test range, equipment that was supposed to be destroyed, but was instead being sold to private buyers. The crash exposed an operation that had been running for years. Millions of dollars in black market military tech flowing through Nevada. Even if that's true, Reeves said, what does it have to do with us? Everything, the man replied, because the investigation into that crash was buried. The officers who responded first, who saw what was really in that truck, they were reassigned, retired early, or simply disappeared. The official report was sanitized, evidence was destroyed, and everyone involved got away with it. Everyone except the driver who died in the crash. The driver who was my brother. The circle of vehicles seemed to press closer, though none of them had moved. Reeve could feel the tension from the hidden figures, the barely controlled violence waiting to be unleashed. Your brother was trafficking illegal military equipment, Sloan said. That makes him a criminal. The man's head tilted, and when he spoke there was anger beneath the electronic distortion. My brother was a truck driver hired to move cargo from point A to point B. He didn't know what he was carrying until the crash, until he was dying. And federal agents were more concerned with recovering the cargo than saving his life. He lived for 3 hours after that crash. Officer Sloan. 3 hours during which he could have been saved if anyone had bothered to try. I'm sorry about your brother, Reeves said, trying to defuse the situation. But we weren't involved in that. We're just highway patrol. No, you weren't involved then, but you're going to be involved now. The man pulled out a tablet. Its screen bright in the darkness. In 12 hours, another transport is scheduled to move through your jurisdiction. Same route, same type of cargo, same people behind it, and you're going to stop it. You want us to intercept a federal transport? Reeve couldn't hide his disbelief. That's not how this works. We don't have the authority. You have probable cause, the man interrupted. Anonymous tip about suspicious vehicle. Possible trafficking. You make the stop. You search the vehicle. You find the illegal cargo. It becomes public before they can cover it up. Media gets involved. Real investigation starts. People responsible for my brother's death face consequences. Or, Sloan said, we report this encounter and you all go to prison for kidnapping federal officers. The man laughed again. Report what? That you were brought to a location by a fake emergency call. The barrels back there contain water, by the way. Completely legal to bury water barrels on public land. No crime there. That you were surrounded by vehicles. No law against driving in the desert at night. That we had a conversation. First Amendment protects that. You have no evidence of any crime except maybe littering. He gestured at the broken glass. The recording. The fake distress call? Sloan protested. What recording? What distress call? The man held up the digital recorder they'd found earlier, then dropped it on the ground and crushed it under his boot. You mean this device that no longer exists? You said kidnapping. Reeve pointed out made threats against our families, did I? I mentioned public information about your families. Anyone can find that online. As for kidnapping, you're free to leave anytime you want. Of course, your tires might not survive the glass, and walking 40 mi through the desert at night presents its own challenges, but no one's physically restraining you. Reeve understood. Now these people had thought through every angle, planned for every contingency. They'd created a situation where the officers were trapped, but technically threatened. But not technically threatened, victims of a crime that would be nearly impossible to prove. "Why should we help you?" Reeve asked. "What's to stop us from walking out of here and forgetting this ever happened?" The man was quiet for a moment, then pulled something from his pocket, a flash drive, because, Officer Reeve, I know you're an honest cop. 15 years, never a single complaint against you. You've turned down bribes, reported corrupt colleagues, always done the right thing even when it cost you. That's why we chose you. You chose us? The fake call was routed specifically to ensure you'd respond. We've been watching you for weeks, learning your patrol patterns, your responses to calls. We know you, Officer Reeve. We know you believe in justice, and we know that if you see evidence of military weapons being trafficked through your jurisdiction, you won't be able to ignore it. He tossed the flash drive to Reeve, who caught it instinctively. That contains shipping manifests, communications between the conspirators, evidence of the previous shipments, including the one that killed my brother. Everything you need to know that what I'm telling you is true. The transport tomorrow is real, and it's carrying weapons that will end up in the hands of people who very much shouldn't have them. This is insane, Sloan said. You're asking us to commit career suicide. Even if what you're saying is true, going after a federal transport without authorization, we'd be finished. Best case scenario, we're fired. Worst case, we end up like your brother. Or the man said, you become the officers who exposed a massive conspiracy. Heroes who prevented military weapons from reaching terrorists or cartels. Your careers wouldn't be over. They'd be made. And if we refuse, Reeve asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he nodded to someone outside the circle of light. A moment later, 2 more figures appeared, dragging something between them. As they got closer, Reeve's blood ran cold. It was a person, bound and gagged, barely conscious, but not just any person. It was Officer Patricia Hernandez, who worked the southern section of their patrol area. She was supposed to be on shift right now, 40 miles away. We have 3 other officers, the man said calmly, all taken during their shifts tonight, all currently guests at various locations throughout the desert. They're safe for now. Uncomfortable, certainly, but unharmed. Whether they stay that way depends on your cooperation. Yo, son of a Sloan, started to rise, his hand going to his weapon. Immediately, multiple laser sights appeared on both officers' chests, red dots dancing across their uniforms. Sloan froze, then slowly sat back down. Emotional responses won't help your colleagues, the man said. Logic will. It's simple math, officers. You help us expose. His patrol car was discovered 15 mi from his last known position. No sign of him. Official report blamed disorientation, possible medical episode. But he'd been investigating suspicious transports through Tonopah, hadn't he? Reeve did remember Mitchell. Good cop, experienced, not the type to get lost or confused. His disappearance had never made sense. You killed Mitchell. We didn't exist 2 years ago. But the people running these transports, they've been operating for a long time and they don't tolerate interference. Mitchell got too close, asked too many questions, so he disappeared. The man paused. Just like you and your colleagues will disappear if you don't help us stop them. You're saying if we don't help you, the transport people will kill us? Sloan asked, confusion clear in his voice. No, Officer Sloan. I'm saying if you don't help us, we'll make it look like the transport people killed you. Your bodies will be found eventually, with evidence linking your deaths to the conspiracy. It will trigger an investigation either way, but you won't be around to see it. The logic was twisted but effective. Help them and survive as heroes or refuse and die as martyrs. Either way, the conspiracy would be exposed. But only one option left them alive. The transport, Reeve said slowly. What exactly are you expecting us to do? The man pulled out another tablet, showing a map with a route highlighted. Tomorrow, 1:47 p.m., a black scimitar with federal plates will pass through your jurisdiction on Highway 95. It will be traveling at exactly the speed limit, all paperwork in order, completely legal in appearance, but you'll receive an anonymous tip about suspicious cargo. You'll make the stop, request to search the trailer. They'll refuse, claim federal jurisdiction. You'll insist, maybe mention recent terrorist threats, the need for local law enforcement cooperation. Eventually, they'll open the trailer to avoid escalation. And inside, M4 rifles, military rye reported destroyed. but actually diverted for black market sale. Enough weapons to arm a small militia. The kind of discovery that makes national news, triggers federal investigations, ends careers of everyone involved in the conspiracy. They won't just open the trailer, Sloan protested. Federal transports have immunity from local searches. They do, the man agreed, unless the drivers aren't actually federal employees. The men driving tomorrow's transport are contractors. Private military corporation employees with fake federal credentials. Good enough to fool a casual inspection, but not good enough to stand up to real scrutiny. When you run their IDs, you'll find discrepancies, enough to justify a deeper look. He produced a folder from inside his jacket, thick with documents. Everything you need is in here. The tip you'll receive word for word. The discrepancies to look for in their credentials. Photos of the weapons from a previous shipment. Even a script for your radio communications to make everything sound legitimate. You've thought of everything, Reeve observed. We've had 6 months to plan this. 6 months while my brother's killers walked free, continued their operations, made millions from selling weapons that could be used against American soldiers. 6 months of watching them transport death through Nevada, while law enforcement looked the other way, or was forced to look the other way. And after, Sloan asked, after we make this stop, expose this conspiracy, then what? You just disappear? We were never here. The man said, this encounter never happened. You received an anonymous tip, did your job, discovered a crime. Heroes don't mention being coerced. Heroes don't admit they were forced. Heroes take credit and move on with their lives. And our colleagues, the other officers you've taken, released unharmed. As soon as the transport is stopped and the media is alerted, they'll wake up in their patrol cars with gaps in their memory and evidence of sedatives in their blood. Unfortunate victims of an unknown drug interaction, perhaps contaminated water from their canteens. It happens. Patricia Hernandez moaned through her gag, starting to regain consciousness. The man noticed and gestured for her to be taken away. Wait, Reeve said. Let me talk to her. Make sure she's really okay. She's fine. Officer Reeve, scared, angry, but unharmed. You'll have to take my word for it. The man looked at his watch, an expensive military model. You have a decision to make. Dawn is in 6 hours. If you agree, you'll be escorted back to your patrol car. Your tires will be repaired, and you'll finish your shift as if nothing happened. Tomorrow you'll make the stop that changes everything if you refuse. He didn't need to finish. The implications were clear. Reeve and Sloan sat in silence for a moment, both processing the impossible situation they'd been placed in. Around them, the circle of vehicles maintained their positions, engines idling, creating a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. The figures in the darkness remained still, patient, waiting. Can we discuss this privately? Reeve asked. The man considered, then nodded. 5 minutes. Stay within the circle. He walked away, leaving the 2 officers alone in the middle of the ring of vehicles. The laser sights disappeared, but Reeve knew there were still dozens of weapons trained on them. This is insane, Sloan whispered urgently. We can't do this. We have to find another way. What way? Reeve asked. They have Patricia and 3 others. They know where our families live. They've planned this down to the smallest detail. So we just go along with it, become criminals ourselves, or we become dead cops who tried to do the right thing. Reeve rubbed his face, feeling every one of his 43 years. Kid, I've been doing this job long enough to know that sometimes there are no good choices. Sometimes there's just surviving. But intercepting a federal transport based on a coerced tip, if what they're saying is true, it's not really a federal transport. And if those weapons are real, we'd be stopping actual criminals. You believe them? Reeve thought about Mitchell, about the strange federal response to that truck crash 6 months ago, about all the little inconsistencies he'd noticed over the years, but never questioned. I don't know, but I know Patricia has 3 kids. Tommy Gwynn, if he's one of the other officers they took, just got married. Sarah Black is 6 months from retirement. We're not just deciding for ourselves here. So we collaborate with terrorists. They're not terrorists, kid. They're something else. Vigilantes, maybe? Revenge seekers. People pushed too far who pushed back. Reeve looked at the younger officer. I don't like this any more than you do, but I've got a daughter your age. You've got parents who are proud of their son, the cop. We stopped that transport. We're heroes who exposed a conspiracy. We refuse. Can our families get folded flags and empty coffins? There has to be another option. We could play along, then report it once we're safe. You think they haven't thought of that? You think they don't have contingencies? These people found out our family details, our patrol schedules, managed to grab 4 cops without anyone noticing. They're not amateurs. Sloan was quiet for a moment. My training officer at the academy said being a cop means always doing the right thing, no matter the cost. Your training officer never had a gun to his head in the middle of the desert. Reeve replied, "The right thing isn't always clear, rookie. Sometimes the right thing is making sure everyone goes home alive, even if it means letting these people win. If they're telling the truth about the weapons, then stopping that shipment is the right thing. The method is wrong. But the result," Reeve trailed off, hating himself for even considering it. "And if they're lying, if this is all some elaborate setup for something else, then we deal with that." He died trying to expose this, even if he didn't know it at the time. "Tomorrow we finish what he started." Reeve looked at Sloan, saw the conflict in the younger officer's eyes. The kid was too green for this, too idealistic to understand that sometimes the world forced impossible choices on good people. But he was also smart enough to recognize when they were out of options. "If we do this," Reeve said slowly, "I need guarantees. The other officers are released unharmed. Our families are left alone, and after tomorrow we never hear from you again." "Agreed," the man said immediately. "After tomorrow we cease to exist." The group disbands. Everyone goes their separate ways. This was only ever about stopping the shipments and getting justice for those who died because of them. And if something goes wrong, if the transport doesn't show or they refuse the search, or then you did your best and everyone still goes home. We're not unreasonable, Officer Reeve. We know operations like this can go sideways. All we ask is that you make a genuine effort. Stop the truck. Try to search it. If it fails, it fails. But at least we tried. I want to talk to Patricia, Reeve insisted. Proof of life for all the officers. The man considered, then pulled out a satellite phone. He dialed, waited, then handed it to Reeve. Speakerphone. "You have 1 minute." Reeve activated the speaker. "Patricia, it's Dalton. Dalton." Patricia's voice was scared but strong. "What the hell is happening? These people. Are you hurt?" "No, I'm okay." Scared shitless, but okay. "They grabbed me during my traffic stop. Professional, quick. They know what they're doing." "Are the others with you?" "Tommy's here. Sarah and Mike are at another location," they said. "Dalton, what do they want?" "It's being handled. Patricia, you're going to be okay. All of you. Just stay calm and this will be over soon, Dalton." The line went dead. The man pocketed the phone. "Satisfied?" Reeve nodded slowly. "We'll do it. But I want those officers released the moment we make the stop. Not after the media shows up. Not after the weapons are confirmed. The moment we stop that truck. Acceptable. They'll be released and directed to your location as backup. It will look like they responded to your call for assistance. And how do we explain their missing time? They won't remember most of it. The sedative we used has amnesiac properties. They'll remember being grabbed, then waking up in their vehicles responding to your call. Disorienting but not incriminating. The man held out the folder of documents. "Everything you need is in here. Study it tonight. Memorize the important parts, then burn it. The anonymous tip will come through dispatch at exactly 1:15 p.m. tomorrow. You'll be in position to intercept." Reeve took the folder, feeling like he was accepting a deal with the devil. "If this goes wrong, it won't," the man interrupted. "You're good cops. Do what you do best, your job. Stop the bad guys. Save the day. Go home to your families." He gestured to the ring of vehicles. "A path will be cleared for you to leave. Your tires have already been repaired. High-speed patches that will hold until you can get proper replacements. Drive straight back to the highway. Report that the illegal dumping call was a false alarm. Finish your shift normally. That's it. That's it, Officer Reeve. Tomorrow you change the world. Tonight you're just 2 cops who responded to a nothing call in the desert." The vehicles began moving, creating an opening in the circle. The broken glass had been swept aside in a clear path to their patrol car. It was also organized, so precise. These people had indeed thought of everything. As they walked back to their vehicle, Sloan whispered, "Are we really doing this?" "We're surviving this?" Reeve corrected. "Everything else is details." They got in their patrol car and Reeve started the engine. It turned over smoothly, and he could feel that the tires had indeed been repaired. Professional work, probably better than the department's motor pool could have done. As they drove through the gap in the vehicles, Reeve looked in his rearview mirror. The figures were already dispersing. Vehicles heading in different directions, disappearing into the desert, as if they'd never been there at all. Within minutes, there was no sign of the encounter, except the folder on the seat between them and the memory of those red laser sights dancing across their chests. They reached the highway without incident, and Reeve grabbed the radio. Dispatch Unit 12. That illegal dumping call was a bust. Looks like someone was just camping. Left some trash behind. We'll file a littering report, but nothing significant. Copy that, Unit 12, return to regular patrol. And just like that, they were back in the normal world where cops responded to routine calls and didn't get forced into conspiracies by masked vigilantes. But the folder between them was a constant reminder that the normal world was an illusion, that beneath the surface, other forces were at work. "What do we do now?" Sloan asked, as they headed back toward their usual patrol route. "We read that folder. We memorize every detail, and tomorrow we do exactly what they want us to do." Reeve glanced at his partner. "And we never ever speak of what really happened tonight. Not to anyone. Not to internal affairs. Not to the FBI. Not even to each other after tomorrow. This night doesn't exist, but no buds, rookie. This is the deal we made to keep 4 cops alive. We stick to it or people die. It's that simple." They drove in silence for several miles, the desert sliding past in the darkness. Finally, Sloan spoke. "Those weapons, if they're real. If this conspiracy is real, then we're doing the right thing for the wrong reasons," Reeve finished. "Sometimes that's the best you can hope for in this job." "Is this what it's always like, the job? I mean, impossible choices and moral compromises." Reeve thought about his 15 years on the force, the things he'd seen, the decisions he'd made. "No, kid. Most days you help people make a difference. Go home feeling good about what you do. But sometimes, rarely, you end up in situations like this. And when you do, you remember that the badge doesn't make you invincible. It just makes you a target for people with agendas. Would you do it again? Become a cop knowing this could happen?" "Ask me tomorrow," Rivy said. "If we're still alive and those weapons are off the street, ask me then." They've pulled into a rest stop to read the folder, parking where they could see anyone approaching. The documents inside were comprehensive. Photos of the truck, the drivers, the weapons, detailed timeline of when and where to intercept, the exact wording of the anonymous tip that would come through dispatch, even contingency plans for various scenarios. "They really did think of everything," Sloan said, studying a schematic of the truck's likely configuration. "Makes you wonder how long they've been planning this." "How many people are involved?" Reeve looked at a photo of the weapons. M4 rifles, military issue. These shouldn't exist outside of active military units or approved law enforcement agencies. "So we're really going to do this? Stop the truck, search it, become heroes or corpses?" "Heroes," Reeve said firmly. "We're going to be heroes, rookie, because the alternative isn't acceptable." As dawn approached, they burned the folder in a trash barrel at the rest stop, watching the evidence of their coercion turn to ash and smoke. The only proof of what had happened in the desert was their memory and the patch jobs on their tires. "Tomorrow at this time, this will all be over," Reeve said, watching the last of the papers burn. "Or we'll be dead." Optimism, rookie. Optimism is what keeps you sane in this job. But as they returned to their patrol car to finish their shift, Reeve couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would change everything one way or another. They'd crossed a line tonight, made a deal they couldn't unmake. Tomorrow they would either expose a conspiracy and save lives, or they would become casualties of a war they didn't even know was being fought. The sun was rising over the desert, painting the mountains in shades of red and gold. It was beautiful, Reeve thought, but it was also unforgiving. The desert didn't care about good cops or bad conspiracies. It just existed, vast and patient, keeping its secrets and swallowing those who ventured too deep into its mysteries. The Nevada sun burning away the morning frost within minutes of dawn. Reeve had managed 3 hours of restless sleep, his dreams filled with laser sights and masked figures. He met Sloan at the station at noon, both of them maintaining the pretense of a normal shift start. "You good?" Reeve asked quietly as they checked out their patrol unit. "No," Sloan admitted, "but I'm here." They'd both memorized the contents of the folder, knew exactly where to be and when. The transport would enter their jurisdiction at approximately 1:40 p.m., traveling north on Highway 95. They needed to be in position by 1:30, ready to respond to the anonymous tip that would come at 1:15. Normal patrol until then, Reeve instructed. We can't do anything that looks suspicious. They drove their usual route, responded to a minor fender bender, wrote 2 speeding tickets, all perfectly routine. But Reeve could feel the tension in the car, both of them watching the clock, counting down to the moment that would change everything. At 1:14 p.m., they were positioned at a truck stop 18 miles south of where they'd intercept the transport. Reeve had the radio in his hand, waiting. At exactly 1:15, dispatch crackled to life. All units be advised. Anonymous tip regarding possible weapons trafficking. Black Scimitar federal plates northbound on Highway 95. Caller claims to have seen military-style weapons being loaded in Vegas. Approach with caution. Unit 12 responding, Reeves said immediately. We're southbound on 95. We'll intercept. Copy that, Unit 12. Backup is available if needed. We'll advise after initial contact. They pulled onto the highway, heading north now toward their destiny. Reeve drove while Sloan reviewed the photos on his phone one more time. Images they'd taken of the burned folder before destroying it. Remember, Reeves said, we have to make this look legitimate. Verisim, follow my lead. Act natural. We're just 2 cops doing our job. Right natural while committing treason. While stopping weapons traffickers, Reeve corrected. Keep that in mind. Whatever else is happening, those weapons are real and they're illegal. At 1:38 p.m. they saw it. Black Scimitar exactly as described, maintaining a steady 65 mph in the right lane. Federal plates, professional driver, everything exactly as the folder had detailed. There's our target, Sloan said unnecessarily. Reeve activated the lights and sirens. The truck immediately began slowing, pulling onto the shoulder in a controlled, professional manner. No attempt to flee, no suspicious behavior, just a federal transport complying with a traffic stop. They pulled in behind the truck and Reeve grabbed the radio. Dispatch, Unit 12, we've stopped the suspected vehicle. Black semi-federal plates, November Tango 7079 approaching now. Copy that, Unit 12, back up en route. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. By then, Patricia and the others should be released and heading their way if the masked man kept his word. Stay alert, Reeve told Sloan as they exited their vehicle. These guys might be contractors, but they're probably armed. They approached the truck from both sides, Reeve taking the driver's side while Sloan covered the passenger side. The driver had his window down, hands visible on the steering wheel. He was exactly as the photos had shown. Mid-30s, military haircut, calm expression. Afternoon, officer, the driver said. Is there a problem? Federal transport, Reeve asked, though he already knew. That's right, Department of Defense shipment. Here's my paperwork. The driver handed over a thick folder of documents. Reeve examined them, looking for the discrepancies the masked man had described. There the authorization signature was dated wrong, off by 1 day. A small error, but enough to raise questions. Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. The driver's expression shifted slightly. Officer, this is a federal transport. You don't have jurisdiction. We received a tip about weapons being trafficked through this area. Your paperwork has some inconsistencies. Please step out of the vehicle. I'm calling my supervisor, the driver said, reaching for his phone. You can call from outside the vehicle, Reeve insisted. Step out now. The passenger door opened and another man emerged. Bigger, more obviously military. Is there a problem here, officers? Stay by the truck, Sloan commanded, his hand resting on his weapon. The driver finally exited, phone in hand. This is harassment. We're federal employees on official business. Then you won't mind if we verify your credentials, Reeves said. He pulled out his phone, pretending to run their IDs through a federal database. In reality, he was looking at the photos from the folder, comparing the information. Mr. Davidson, your federal ID number doesn't match DOD records. It was a bluff, but based on what the masked man had told them, it should be accurate. The driver and passenger exchanged glances. There must be a mistake. No mistake. You're contractors, not federal employees. Private military corporation. Probably Blackstone or Titan Security. That means this isn't an official federal transport, which means we have every right to search this vehicle. You don't know what you're doing, the passenger said, his voice taking on a threatening tone. This shipment is protected. People way above your pay grade are invested in this reaching its destination. Then they should have used actual federal employees, Sloan said, surprising Reeve with his conviction. We're not opening the trailer, the driver said firmly. Not without authorization from our actual supervisors. Then we wait for backup and a warrant, Reeves said. Your choice. For a moment, the situation balanced on a knife's edge. The contractors were calculating their options, probably wondering if they could take out two rural cops and disappear. Reeve kept his hand near his weapon, ready for violence. Then, in the distance, sirens, multiple vehicles approaching fast. The backup that should have been 15 minutes out was arriving early. 3 patrol cars pulled up, and Reeves' heart nearly stopped when he saw Patricia Hernandez exit one of them, looking confused, but very much alive and free. Tommy Enwin and Sarah Black emerged from the other vehicles, along with Mike Torres. All 4 officers who'd been taken were here, apparently responding to his call for backup. Dalton, Patricia said, approaching carefully. We got a priority call to assist. What's the situation? She showed no sign of remembering the previous night. No indication she'd been held hostage. The sedatives with amnesiac properties. The masked man had kept that promise at least. Possible weapons trafficking, Reeve explained. These gentlemen are refusing to allow a search of their trailer. Federal transport, the driver protested. This is way out of your jurisdiction. Not if you're trafficking illegal weapons, Tommy and Gwen said, moving to cover the passenger. With 6 officers now on scene, the contractors were significantly outnumbered. The driver made another call, speaking urgently to someone. Then he hung up and turned to Reeve with a resigned expression. We'll open it, but this is on you. Whatever happens next, it's on you. They moved to the back of the trailer, the driver producing keys. The lock was serious hardware, military-grade, not standard shipping equipment. He turned it and the massive doors swung open. The trailer was full of crates, each marked with military designation codes. But one crate near the door had been damaged, its side partially open. And visible through the gap was the unmistakable shape of rifle barrels. Jesus Christ, Patricia breathed. Are those M4 rifles? Reeve confirmed. Military weapons that are supposed to be in DoD inventory or destroyed. This is a mistake, the driver said, but his voice had lost all conviction. These are decommissioned weapons being transported for disposal. Decommissioned weapons don't have ammunition, Sloan observed, pointing to another crate clearly marked as containing 56 NATO rounds. Call it in, Reeve told Patricia. Federal agencies, state police, everyone, and get photos of everything before anyone tries to make this disappear. As Patricia made the calls and the other officers documented the scene, Reeve noticed something. The passenger contractor was texting rapidly on his phone, and he had a slight smile on his face, not the expression of someone whose illegal operation had just been... The man looked up. You have no idea what you've just done, do you? The people behind this shipment, they don't just go to prison. They don't just accept defeat. They adapt, evolve, and eliminate problems. Is that a threat? It's a forecast, officer. You just became a problem. All of you did, and problems get solved. Before Reeve could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Well done. Contract complete. Look under your spare tire when you get home. Stay safe, heroes. The masked man's final message. Whatever happened next, their part in his plan was finished. Within 30 minutes, the scene was swarming with federal agents, state police, and media, who'd somehow been alerted to the story. The weapons were confirmed as military hardware that had been reported destroyed, worth millions on the black market. The contractors were arrested, though they maintained their silence even as they were led away in handcuffs. Reeve and Sloan found themselves at the center of a media storm, hailed as heroes who'd uncovered a massive conspiracy. Patricia and the others, still confused about their missing hours from the night before, were swept up in the celebration. The official story was already being written. Alert officers acting on an anonymous tip had exposed a weapons trafficking ring operating under the cover of federal authority. But that night, when Reeve finally made it home, he checked under his spare tire as the message had instructed. He found an envelope containing a single photograph, him and Sloan standing in the circle of vehicles in the desert, surrounded by masked figures. A reminder that the truth was different from the official story, and that someone out there had proof. There was also a note. The conspiracy goes deeper than just weapons. Mitchell wasn't the first cop to disappear. Won't be the last. Watch your back. The real war is just beginning. Reeve burned both the photo and the note. But their message was clear. They'd won this battle, exposed this shipment, saved lives by keeping those weapons off the street. But they'd also made enemies, powerful ones, who operated in shadows and didn't forgive interference. 3 weeks later, the investigation had expanded dramatically. 17 people had been arrested, including 2 high-ranking DoD officials and a congressman who'd been facilitating the sales. The media called it the biggest weapons trafficking scandal in U.S. history. Reeve and Sloan were invited to testify before Congress, offered promotions, hailed as exemplars of honest law enforcement. But Reeve couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Sometimes he'd catch glimpses of vehicles that reminded him of that night in the desert. Sometimes his radio would crackle with static that sounded almost like voices. And sometimes late at night, he'd wonder if the masked man and his people were still out there, planning their next move against the conspiracy they'd only partially exposed. Patricia never fully recovered her memory of that missing night. Medical tests showed traces of a sophisticated sedative in her system, but nothing that could explain the complete amnesia. She returned to duty, but Reeve noticed she was different, more cautious, always checking her mirrors, always ensuring her radio was working. On some level, her body remembered the danger, even if her mind didn't. Sloan struggled the most with what they'd done. The rookie, who'd believed in absolute right and wrong, had been forced to confront the gray areas of survival and justice. He was a good cop, maybe even a great one now. But the idealism had been replaced with pragmatism. He never spoke about that night in the desert. But sometimes Reeve would catch him staring at nothing, probably replaying those moments when they'd sat in the circle of vehicles, their lives hanging by a thread. 6 months after the weapons bust, Officer Mike Torres disappeared. His patrol car was found on a service road, not unlike the one where Reeve and Sloan had been ambushed. No signs of struggle, no body, just an empty vehicle and a mystery. The official investigation found nothing, but Reeve knew. The contractor had warned them. Problems get solved. Reeve started carrying a personal locator beacon, separate from his official equipment. He varied his routes, never followed patterns, always stayed alert. He knew it was just a matter of time before someone came for him too. The conspiracy they'd exposed had been just one tentacle of something much larger, and cutting it off had only made the creature angry. But he also knew that somewhere out there, the masked man and his group were watching too. They'd kept their word, released the hostages, disappeared after the weapons were exposed. But their final message suggested they weren't done, that this had been just one battle in a longer war. Late one night, parked on a ridge overlooking the desert, Reeve found himself thinking about that service road, about the choice they'd been forced to make. They'd saved lives by stopping those weapons, had exposed corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. They'd been heroes, even if the heroism had been coerced. But they'd also learned that the world was more complex than their training had prepared them for, that sometimes the good guys and bad guys wore the same masks, just for different reasons. That survival sometimes meant compromising principles you thought were uncompromisable. His radio crackled with static, and for a moment he thought he heard something in the white noise. Voices distant and distorted calling for help. But when he adjusted the frequency, there was nothing. Just the empty desert air and the ghost of signals that might or might not exist. Somewhere out there on another service road in another valley, someone else might be facing the same impossible choice he and Sloan had faced. Someone else might be sitting in a circle of vehicles, surrounded by masked figures, being forced to decide between collaboration and death. The war between the conspiracy and those who opposed it was continuing, invisible to most, but devastating to those caught in the crossfire. Reeves started his engine and headed back to town, back to his life as a hero cop who'd exposed a conspiracy. But he knew the truth. He was just a survivor who'd made the only choice he could make. And somewhere in the desert, on roads that didn't appear on maps, in valleys that swallowed sound and light, that war continued. The service road where it all happened still existed, still wound through the desert following the old power lines. But Reeve never went back there, never drove that route again. Some places were better left unvisited, some memories better left undisturbed. The desert kept its secrets and Reeve kept his. That was the deal he'd made that night, sitting in a circle of broken glass surrounded by patient death. He was a hero now, decorated and promoted. But heroes, he'd learned, were just people who survived situations that should have killed them. and survival in the end was its own form of victory. The radio crackled again, and this time the voice was clear. Dispatch, calling about a suspicious vehicle on a remote road. Another officer would respond, would drive into the darkness, not knowing what waited for them. Reeve said a silent prayer for whoever it was, hoping they wouldn't face the same choice he had, knowing they probably would eventually. The desert was vast, full of service roads and hidden valleys, abandoned places where the normal rules didn't apply. And in those places the war continued. Conspiracy versus justice, corruption versus revenge, survival versus principle. Reeve had chosen survival, and he lived with that choice every day. But late at night, when the radio attic sounded like voices and the darkness pressed close, he wondered if he'd really survived at all, or if part of him was still sitting in that circle of vehicles, surrounded by masked figures, forever frozen in the moment of an impossible choice. The service road was still there, waiting for the next players in the game. And the game, Reeve knew, would continue long after he was gone, long after the weapons bust was forgotten, long after the heroes had become footnotes and reports no one would ever read. The roommate, David Garrison, had told Dispatch. His voice carried the particular mix of annoyance and concern that Whitaker had heard countless times before. The sound of someone trying to convince themselves that their friends were just being irresponsible, not in actual danger. They do this Herbeck stuff all the time, exploring old buildings and mines, taking pictures for their Instagram, but they always check in, always. Whitaker had been with the Nevada Highway Patrol for 12 years, spending most of that time working the remote territories where the desert swallowed history whole, leaving behind the bones of towns that had thrived during the silver boom and died just as quickly when the ore ran out. She knew Silver Ridge well, had responded to half a dozen calls there over the years, usually involving injured hikers who underestimated the dangers of exploring structures that had been deteriorating for over a century. For occasionally teenagers who thought an abandoned town was the perfect place for a party, until they discovered that 100-year-old floorboards don't support modern weight distributions very well. The drive to Silver Ridge took her off the main highway and onto progressively deteriorating roads that wound through valleys carved by long dead-end rivers. The patrol car's suspension protested every pothole and washout, and more than once, Whitaker had to navigate around sections where the asphalt had simply given up and returned to desert. By the time she reached the outskirts of the ghost town, the sun was fully up, casting harsh shadows that turned the remaining structures into a study in stark contrasts. Brilliant white in the sun, absolute black in the shadows. Silver Ridge had been a company town built around the He Prosperity Mine in 1874 and abandoned by 1923 when the silver played out and the water table dropped too low to sustain even the most determined residents. What remained was a collection of buildings in various states of decay. The two-story hotel with its roof caved in the general store, with walls that leaned at angles that defied physics. The schoolhouse that somehow still stood straight, despite having most of its western wall missing. And looming over it all, carved into the mountainside like a wound that wouldn't heal, was the mine itself, a network of shafts and tunnels that honeycombed the mountain for miles in every direction. Whitaker found the missing couple's vehicle easily enough. A dusty blue Toyota 4E Runner parked near what had once been the town's main street. The truck was locked, windows rolled up, camping gear visible in the back along with expensive-looking camera equipment. No signs of disturbance, no indication that they'd left in a hurry. Their phones were missing, but that didn't mean much out here where cell service was a fantasy, and GPS signals struggled to penetrate the mountain's iron-heavy rock. She was examining the ground around the vehicle for tracks when she heard another engine approaching. A battered board pickup emerged from the dust cloud it was creating, and Whitaker recognized Franklin Ortiz even before he stepped out. Ortiz was a volunteer with the county search and rescue team, a retired mining engineer who knew the old workings better than anyone else alive. He was in his 60s, weathered by decades of desert sun with hands scarred from a lifetime of working with rock and metal. Colleen. He greeted her with a nod, his expression already grim. Heard the call on the scanner. Urban explorers, two of them college kids from Reno, been missing since yesterday afternoon. Whitaker showed him the photos David had provided. Marcus with his carefully maintained beard and vintage camera. Jessica with her pink stri-infectious smile. They looked like what they were, young, enthusiastic, confident in their immortality. Ortiz studied the photos, then looked up at the mine entrance visible on the mountainside. If they went in there, we've got problems. Count's been trying to get funding to properly seal that mine for 20 years. Every few months, someone new discovers it, posts about it online, and we get another wave of explorers who think 100-year-old mining tunnels are just another tourist attraction. But it's sealed, right? I remember there being a gate. Ortiz's expression darkened. There was. Come on, I'll show you. They hiked up the steep trail that switchbacked up the mountainside, past rusted or carts that had been abandoned where they stood, past the remnants of the aerial tramway that had once carried silver ore down to the processing mill in the valley below. The entrance to the Prosperity Mine's main shaft was exactly as Whitaker remembered it, a timber-framed opening cut into the living rock, maybe 8 FT high and 6 FT wide. But the heavy steel gate that had been installed by the county 5 years ago hung open, its massive padlock cut clean through with what looked like bolt cutters. Fresh cut, Ortiz observed, examining the lock. Maybe a week old, no more. And look here. He pointed to marks in the dust near the entrance. Someone's been moving equipment. These are dolly tracks. Someone wheeled something heavy out of here recently. Whitaker crouched to examine the tracks more closely. Mixed in with the dolly marks were footprints, lots of them. Some were old, filled with dust, but others were fresh, including 2 sets that matched the tread pattern she'd noticed by the forerunner. Our missing kids were here recently, but it was what she found next that made her stomach tighten with apprehension. Propped against a rock about 10 FT from the mine entrance was a piece of rusted sheet metal, and scratched into its surface with something sharp was a single word: help. The scratches were fresh, the metal shaving still bright against the rust. Whoever had written it had done so in a hurry. The letters were uneven, desperate, and there was something else. A smear of what looked like blood on the lower corner of the metal, as if someone had cut themselves on the sharp edge. "We need to go in," Whitaker said, already reaching for the flashlight on her duty belt. Ortiz grabbed her arm. "Not without proper equipment. That mine's been abandoned for 100 years, and someone's been in there recently stealing God knows what. The supports could be compromised. There could be bad air, cave-ins waiting to happen. We do this right, or we don't do it at all." He was right, of course. Whitaker had been trained in confined space rescue, knew all the protocols, but she also knew that every minute counted when people were trapped underground. "How long to get equipped?" "I've got gear in my truck, helmets, lights, air monitors, rope. Basic stuff, but enough for an initial reconnaissance. But Colleen, we should call for backup. Get the full search and rescue team out here." "Do it," Whitaker agreed. "But I'm not waiting. Those kids could be hurt, could be running out of air. We do a quick reconnaissance while the team mobilizes." 20 minutes later, they stood at the mine entrance again, now properly equipped with helmets, headlamps, and backup lights. Ortiz had an air quality monitor clipped to his belt, and both carried emergency oxygen masks in case they encountered bad air. The monitor showed acceptable levels at the entrance, though Ortiz warned that could change quickly once they got deeper. The temperature dropped 15 degrees the moment they crossed the threshold into the mine. The beam of Whitaker's headlamp revealed rough-hewn walls supported by massive timber beams that had been turning to stone for a century. The floor was relatively smooth, worn by countless boots and orc cards, but covered now in a layer of dust and debris that showed recent disturbance. The footprints were clearer here, protected from the wind. Definitely 2 sets going in, but Whitaker couldn't tell if there were tracks coming out. "Main shaft goes straight for about 300 FT, Ortiz explained, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Then it hits the first junction. 3 tunnels branch off. One goes to the silver vein they were following, another to an exploratory shaft that never produced anything, and the third connects to the older workings from the 1880s. They moved carefully, testing each step. The timber supports groaned occasionally, dropping dust and small rocks that made Whitaker's heart race each time. About a 100 FT in, they found the first sign of recent activity: a modern LED lantern, the expensive rechargeable kind, lying on its side with its lens cracked. It was still on, though the battery indicator showed nearly dead. "This is Jessica's," Whitaker said, recreating it from the gear. Something made them run deeper into the mine instead of back toward the entrance. They reached the first junction, and Ortiz consulted a laminated map he'd brought. If they were running in the dark, panicking, they could have taken any of these tunnels. The left one, the old silver vein, goes deepest, almost a mile into the mountain. The right is shorter, but has multiple levels connected by rotten ladders. The middle one is the most dangerous. It connects to the old workings, where there have been multiple cave-ins over the years. Whitaker swept her light down each tunnel in turn. The left showed no obvious disturbance. The right had some footprints, but they looked old. But the middle tunnel, Franklin, look at this. In the dust at the entrance to the middle tunnel were clear drag marks, as if something heavy had been pulled through recently, and there was more blood, droplets forming a trail that led into the darkness. They went this way, Whitaker said, already moving toward the tunnel. Wait! Ortiz grabbed her shoulder. This is the worst possible tunnel they could have chosen. The old workings are a maze, dozens of crosscuts, winzes and raises that create a three-dimensional labyrinth. People have gotten lost in there and never been found. And that's not even considering the cave-in risk. All the more reason to hurry, Whitaker countered. They're injured, probably lost, definitely frightened. How long can they survive in there? Depends on where they are. Some sections have good air circulation, could last days. Others are dead zones where CO2 accumulates. Could be unconscious in hours, dead in a day. Ortiz checked his monitor again. We should at least wait for backup. A sound echoed from the middle tunnel. Faint but unmistakable. A voice calling out. Human, desperate but too distorted by echo and distance to make out words. That decides it, Whitaker said, and plunged into the tunnel before Ortiz could stop her. The middle tunnel was narrower than the main shaft, forcing them to walk single file. The timber supports here were older, some dating back to the original 1880s construction. Many were cracked, held in place more by habit than structural integrity. The floor was uneven, littered with fallen rocks and rotted wood. They had to move carefully, but Whitaker found herself fighting the urge to run toward that voice. They followed the blood trail for another 100 FT before reaching another junction. This time there were 4 possible directions. The tunnel continued straight, branched left and right, and a wooden ladder led up to what Ortiz identified as an upper level that had been mined out in the 1890s. The ladder's rotted through, he observed, testing it with his hand. Several rungs crumbled at his touch. They didn't go up. Whitaker examined the 3 horizontal options. The blood trail seemed to go left, but there were footprints in multiple directions. They got confused here, probably tried different tunnels before choosing one. The voice came again, clearer this time from the left tunnel. It was male, probably Marcus. And now Whitaker could make out words. Please, someone, Jessica. They hurried down the left ash tunnel, which descended at a steep angle. The air grew noticeably worse, and Ortiz's monitor began beeping warnings about CO2 levels. We're entering a dead zone, he warned. Limited time here. 50 FT down the sloping tunnel. They found Marcus. He was sitting against the wall, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, his face pale and starry with tears and dirt. When their lights hit him, he flinched and raised a hand to shield his eyes. Thank God, he gasped. Please, you have to help Jessica. She went deeper, trying to find another way out. She hasn't come back. Whitaker knelt beside him, quickly assessing his injuries. Broken leg, definitely possible concussion based on the gash on his forehead. Dehydration and early stages of CO2 poisoning from his labored breathing. Marcus, I'm Sergeant Whitaker with the Highway Patrol. You're going to be okay. How long has Jessica been gone? I don't know, hours. My phone died. We were exploring, taking pictures, when we heard voices in the mine. We thought it was other explorers, but then we saw them. His eyes widened with remembered fear. They were taking things from the mine. Old equipment, metal fixtures, copper wiring. They saw us, started yelling, threatening us. We ran, but I tripped, fell down something. Jessica dragged me here, but my leg she went to find help. Another way out. That was God, I don't know how long ago. Which way did she go? Ortiz asked urgently. Marcus pointed deeper into the tunnel. That way. But there's something else. Those men, the ones stripping the mine, I don't think they left. I've been hearing them moving around in the tunnels. They're looking for us. Whitaker and Ortiz exchanged glances. If there were copper thieves still in the mine, this had just become a potential crime scene, as well as a rescue operation. Copper theft from abandoned mines had become epidemic in recent years as metal prices soared, and thieves were often armed and dangerous, especially when cornered in a place with limited exits. "Franklin, we need to get Marcus out of here," Whitaker said. "Can you manage him alone?" Ortiz shook his head. "Not with that leg. He needs a stretcher, proper stabilization, and we can't leave Jessica down here." The CO2 monitor was beeping more insistently now. They were approaching dangerous levels, and all three of them were beginning to feel the effects. Headaches, shortness of breath, a growing sense of disorientation. "Okay, new plan," Whitaker decided. "We move Marcus to better air. Then I go after Jessica, while you stay with him and wait for backup." "That's insane," Ortiz protested. "You don't know these tunnels. You could get lost in minutes." "Then come with me. We move fast, find Jessica, and get out." Before Ortiz could respond, they heard new sounds echoing through the tunnel system. Voices, multiple people, and the clank of metal on stone. The copper thieves were moving through the mine, and from the sound of it, they were getting closer. "They know we're here," Marcus whispered, terror clear in his voice. "They must have seen you come in. They won't let us leave. We've seen their faces, know what they're doing." Whitaker drew her service weapon. Though she knew how useless it would be in these confined spaces where a ricochet could kill anyone, including herself. "Franklin, get on the radio. See if you can raise anyone. Get back up in here now." Ortiz tried, but the radio produced only static. The mountain's iron content and the depth underground made communication impossible. They were on their own. A woman's scream echoed through the tunnels, high, terrified, and definitely Jessica. It came from deeper in the mine, beyond where the tunnel disappeared into darkness. "That's her." Marcus tried to stand, but collapsed immediately. "Please, you have to help her." Whitaker made a decision that went against every protocol she'd been taught. "Franklin, stay with Marcus. I'm going after Jessica." "Colleen?" "No," but she was already moving, following the sound of Jessica's voice deeper into the mine. The tunnel continued to descend, and the air grew thicker with each step. Her headlamp cut through the darkness, revealing more deteriorating supports, more evidence of recent disturbance. Someone had definitely been through here, removing anything of value. Copper wiring that had once powered electric lights, brass fittings, even the iron rails that had guided orc cards. The tunnel branched again, and Whitaker paused, listening. She could hear movement somewhere ahead and to the left, but the acoustics of the mine made it impossible to judge distant footsteps. Multiple sets entering the chamber from another tunnel. Her light caught three figures, all wearing mining helmets with lights, all carrying tools that could easily become weapons. Pry bars, hammers, a battery-powered saw for cutting metal. "Well, well," one of them said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "The cop found our little photographer." "This just got complicated, boys." Whitaker recognized the speaker. Ray Henders, a local she'd arrested twice for theft and once for assault. He'd been suspected of copper theft for years, but had never been caught in the act. Until now. "Ray, it's over." She called down, one hand on her weapon. "Backup's already in the mine. Let the girl go and we can all walk out of here." Ray laughed. An ugly sound in the enclosed space. "Nice try, Sergeant, but we've been watching. You came in with just old man Ortiz. Your radio won't work down here. And real backup's at least an hour away. That's plenty of time for accidents to happen." One of the other men spoke up, younger, nervous. "Ray, she's a cop. We can't." "Shut up, Tyler," Ray snapped. "We're already looking at serious time for the copper. You want to add witness tampering to it or worse." He looked back up at Whitaker. "You should have stayed out of this, Sergeant. Minded your own business. Now you're just 3 more urban explorers who went too deep and never came out." The air monitor on Whitaker's belt was beeping constantly now. The CO2 levels were approaching dangerous concentrations, and she could feel it. The headache was getting worse, her breathing more labored, her thoughts starting to fog. They needed to get out soon, or they'd all be unconscious within the hour. "Think about what you're doing, Ray," she tried reasoning. "You're talking about killing a cop and 2 kids. That's death penalty territory." "Only if they find the bodies," Rai replied. "This mine goes down 1700 Votiv, connects to flooded workings from 3 different operations. Plenty of places for bodies to disappear. Hell, there's probably a dozen skeletons down here already from the mining days." He was moving as he talked, positioning his men to block the exits. Whitaker realized with growing dread that he'd done this before, maybe not murder, but certainly used the mine's dangers to his advantage. How many accidents had there been over the years that were actually Ray covering his tracks? A new sound echoed through the chamber, a deep groaning of wood under stress, followed by the crack of breaking timber. One of the ancient support beams was giving way, weakened by the thieves' removal of cross-bracing for its metal bolts. "The whole thing's coming down," Tyler shouted, backing toward the exit. "Hold your position," Rai ordered, but there was fear in his voice now too. The beam cracked again, louder this time, and a cascade of rocks and dirt fell from the ceiling. The platform Jessica was on shuddered and tilted. She screamed, scrambling for purchase as the ancient wood began to separate from the wall. Whitaker didn't think. She just moved. She scrambled across the cross beams with reckless speed, reaching the platform just as it tilted past the point of no return. She grabbed Jessica's arm and yanked her towards the solid rock ledge just as the platform tore away completely, crashing to the chamber floor in an explosion of rotted wood and dust. The impact triggered a chain reaction. More support beams cracked. More rocks fell. The thieves scattered, their careful positioning forgotten in the face of imminent cave-in. Ray shouted orders that no one listened to as his men fled into the tunnels. "We have to move," Whitaker shouted to Jessica, pulling her along the narrow ledge toward where she remembered seeing another tunnel entrance. The chamber was collapsing. Century-old supports finally giving way to time and gravity and human greed. They made it to the tunnel entrance, just as the main ceiling beam split with a sound like a gunshot. The tunnel they entered was narrow, unfamiliar, heading upward at a steep angle. Whitaker had no idea where it led, but anywhere was better than the collapsing chamber behind them. They ran, crawled through the darkness, their lights bouncing wildly, the sound of the collapse following them like a living thing. The tunnel branched, and Whitaker chose randomly, always picking passages that seemed to lead upward, toward better air, toward the surface. Behind them she could hear Ray shouting, cursing, still following despite the danger. He knew that if they escaped, his operation was finished. He had nothing left to lose. The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller than the last but still substantial. And there, thank God, was Marcus with Ortiz, who had somehow found an alternate route to reach them. "The whole mine's coming down," Whitaker gasped. "We need to get out now." Ortiz didn't argue. He'd fashioned a crude crutch for Marcus from broken timber, and together they began moving toward what Ortiz swore was a passage to the main tunnel. But they'd only gone 50 FT when Ray emerged from another tunnel, blocking their path. He was alone now, his men having abandoned him. But he still held the pry bar like a weapon. "Nobody's leaving," he said. And there was something broken in his voice. A man who'd crossed a line and knew there was no going back. "This mine's been my livelihood for 3 years. I'm not going to prison because some kids couldn't mind their own business. It's over, Ray," Whitaker said, stepping between him and the others. "Your men are gone. The mine's collapsing. If we don't get out now, we all die down here." "Maybe that's for the best," Rai said, and raised the pry bar. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the confined space, the echo bouncing off the walls until it seemed like a dozen shots. Rai looked down at his shoulder in surprise, where Whitaker's bullet had struck him. The pry bar fell from nerveless fingers. "I'm a damn good shot, Rai," Whitaker said, her weapon still trained on him. "The next one won't be in your shoulder. Now move aside." Rai stumbled back against the wall, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the shock and pain of his wound. They moved past him quickly, Ortiz leading the way through a maze of passages that Whitaker couldn't have navigated alone. The main tunnel, when they finally reached it, felt like salvation. The air was better here, and they could see actual daylight filtering in from the entrance. Still hundreds of feet away, but visible, achievable. They moved as quickly as they could, Marcus hopping on his makeshift crutch with Jessica supporting his other side. Whitaker bringing up the rear and watching for any sign of Ray following. They were 100 FT from the entrance when the big collapse hit. The sound started as a low rumble, like distant thunder that grew and grew until it became a physical force that shook the mountain itself. The main tunnel support beams, weakened by the collapse in the deeper chambers and the systematic removal of their metal bracing, began to fail in sequence. It was like dominoes falling, each failure triggering the next, a cascade of destruction that had been building for years and needed only this final insult to bring it all down. "Run!" Ortiz shouted. Though it was unnecessary, They were all moving as fast as they could. Marcus practically being carried between Jessica and Whitaker now, as Ortiz led the way. His knowledge of the mine structure letting him anticipate which sections would hold longest. The ceiling began to rain debris, first dust, then pebbles, then fist-sized rocks that struck with bruising force. A timber beam directly overhead cracked with a sound like breaking bones, and Whitaker shoved Jessica and Marcus forward, just as it came down, missing them by inches. They could see the entrance clearly now. "Jessica!" she called out, her voice rough with dust. Marcus Franklin here. Jessica's voice came from inches away, thin with terror. "I can't see anything." "My leg!" Marcus groaned from somewhere to her left. "It's trapped." Franklin, no response. Ortiz, a cough, then his voice, weak but alive. "I'm here, pinned but breathing." Whitaker tried to orient herself in the darkness. They were in a pocket maybe 6 FT long and 3 FT high, created by the angle of the wall and the way the larger rocks had fallen. She could feel smaller debris still settling, hear the occasional crack of rock under pressure. Their space could collapse completely at any moment. She forced herself to think clearly, despite the panic clawing at her chest. They were maybe 20 FT from the entrance when the collapse hit, close enough that rescue was possible, but far enough that they could be here for hours or days before anyone could dig through. "Everyone stay calm," she said, trying to project authority she didn't feel. "Search and rescue will be here soon. We just need to conserve air and wait." "My phone," Jessica said suddenly. "I still have it." A moment later, blessed light, the weak glow of a phone screen illuminating their tiny prison. It wasn't much, but after the absolute darkness it felt like salvation. The light revealed their situation. They were indeed in a small pocket, the ceiling of collapsed rock mere inches above them in places. Marcus's left leg was pinned under a fallen beam, though it seemed to be supporting some of the weight above them. Moving it could bring everything down. Ortiz was against the far wall, a large rock across his chest that he couldn't shift alone. The phone had no signal, of course, but it showed the time, 11:47 a.m. They'd been in the mine for over 2 hours. Whitaker wondered how long it would take for real help to arrive. The full search and rescue team was probably already mobilizing, but they'd need heavy equipment to get through this collapse. Hours at minimum, possibly days. "We need to ration the phone battery," Whitaker said. "Turn it off for now. We'll check it every 30 minutes. The darkness returned somehow worse now that they'd had that brief respite. In the black, every sound was magnified. The settling of rocks, the labored breathing of poor people in a confined space, the occasional whimper of pain from Marcus. "Tell us a story," Jessica said suddenly. "Please, I need to think about something else." It was Ortiz who responded, his voice stronger now. "You want to know the real history of this mine? Not the tourist version, but what really happened here." "Yes," Jessica said quickly, and even Marcus made a sound of agreement. The Prosperity Mine wasn't about silver. "Not really," Ortiz began. "Oh, they found silver. Sure made a few men rich, but the real story was about what else they found down here. My grandfather worked this mine in the 1910s before it closed. He told me stories that his supervisors made him swear never to repeat." "What kind of stories?" Whitaker asked, grateful for any distraction from their situation. "They broke through into natural caverns about 800 FT down. Massive chambers that had never seen sunlight, filled with formations that couldn't exist according to geology, crystals that glowed with their own light, water that ran uphill, and bones, enormous bones that didn't match any known animal." "You're making this up," Marcus said. But there was hope in his voice that it might be true, that there might be magic even in this nightmare. "My grandfather saw them himself. The company sealed that section immediately. Told the miners it was unstable. But men talk, especially when they're drunk. They said the bones were human-shaped, but wrong, too tall. Joints that bent in ways that shouldn't be possible. And there were carvings on the cavern walls, symbols that hurt to look at directly." "Why didn't anyone report it?" Jessica asked. "This was 1912, Ortiz replied. "The company owned the town, the newspaper, the law. What they said to keep quiet stayed quiet. But the workers knew. They started having dreams after that section was opened. The same dream, all of them. They dreamed of things moving in the deep places, things that had been sleeping until the miners woke them with their dynamite and pickaxes." "Did anyone ever go back to look?" Whitaker found herself asking, drawn into the story despite herself. "Once in 1921, 2 years before the mine closed, a team of scientists from the University of Nevada came to investigate the rumors. 3 men went down to the sealed section. Only one came back and he never spoke again. Not one word for the 40 years until he died. But he drew pictures obsessively until his family had him committed. Pictures of things that couldn't exist. Architectures that violated physics, and always those bones arranged in patterns that suggested they'd been placed deliberately, like warnings or worship. The darkness seemed to press closer as Ortiz spoke, and Whitaker found herself wondering what else might be down here in the deep places of the mine. What might be stirring in the chambers below them? It was nonsense, of course, just a story to pass the time. But in the absolute darkness with tons of rock above them, nonsense felt very close to truth. A new sound interrupted the story. Voices muffled but distinct from somewhere beyond their prison of rock. "Help!" Jessica screamed. "We're in here, help us!" They all joined in, shouting until their throats were raw, but the voices faded without responding. Either they hadn't been heard, or worse, whoever was out there couldn't reach them. "They know we're here," Whitaker said firmly. That was probably the advance team assessing the collapse. They'll be back with equipment. Time crawled in the darkness. Jessica turned on her phone periodically to check the time. Noon, 12:30, 1 p.m. The air was getting noticeably worse, and they were all developing headaches from the CO2 buildup. Whitaker tried not to think about how much oxygen 4 people consumed in a space this small, how quickly they could reach toxic levels. It was during one of the dark periods that they heard it. Movement in the rocks above them, deliberate and rhythmic. Not the random settling of a collapse, but something with purpose. "Someone's digging," Marcus said, hope flooding his voice. But the movement stopped as suddenly as it had started. Then from somewhere that seemed both very close and impossibly far away, came a voice, not calling to them, not trying to rescue them, but singing a low, tuneless humming that rose and fell like breathing. "What the hell is that?" Jessica whispered. "Could be Rye," Whitaker suggested, though she didn't believe it. The voice didn't sound like Rye, didn't sound like anyone who'd been in the mine with them. It sounded older, rougher, like someone who'd been underground for a very long time. The humming continued, moving through the collapsed tunnel in ways that suggested passages they couldn't see, spaces in the rubble that someone knew how to navigate. Sometimes it was above them, sometimes to the side, always moving, always just out of reach. "There are stories," Ortiz said quietly, "about people who never left the mines. Not just here, but all through Nevada. Miners who got lost in the deep tunnels and changed, adapted to the darkness. They say they live on blind fish from underground streams and mushrooms that grow in the deepest caves. They say they can navigate in absolute darkness, that their eyes have grown huge and pale, that they remember the old tunnels that were sealed before the maps were made." "Stop it," Jessica pleaded. "That's not helping." But the humming continued, and now they could hear other sounds, metal on rock like someone using tools, but not in any rhythm that suggested normal mining work. It was exploratory, probing, like something searching for a way in. Whitaker felt for her service weapon, reassured by its weight. She had 13 rounds left. She'd kept count. Not much against a cave-in, but enough to deal with any human threat, even in the dark. The probing sounds got closer, and now they could hear breathing that wasn't their own. Raspy and wet like diseased lungs. Jessica turned on her phone light in panic, sweeping it around their small space, but there was nothing. Just the 4 of them in their tomb of rock. Then the light caught something. A gap in the collapsed material near Marcus's pinned leg. Not big enough for a person, but large enough for an arm. And reaching through that gap was indeed an arm, but wrong somehow. The proportions were off, too long with too many joints, and the skin was pale as paper, almost translucent in the phone's weak light. Jessica screamed. The arm withdrew instantly, disappearing into the gap with inhuman speed. The humming stopped, replaced by a chittering sound like laughter or communication in a language that predated words. "What was that?" Marcus gasped. "What was that?" "I don't know," Whitaker admitted, training her weapon on the gap. "But everyone stay calm. Stay together, calm." Jessica was on the edge of hysteria. "There's something in here with us. Something that's not human. We don't know what we saw," Whitaker said, though she'd seen the same impossible arm they all had. "The lack of oxygen can cause hallucinations. We're all stressed, hurt, frightened. Our minds can play tricks." But even as she said it, She heard more movement in the gaps around them, more of that jittering communication, and she knew that whatever was out there in the collapsed mine with them, it wasn't a hallucination. It was real, and it was interested in them. The chittering sounds multiplied, seeming to come from multiple directions. Now Whitaker tried to count the distinct voices. 3, maybe 4, possibly more. They were communicating with each other, coordinating something, and that implied intelligence, planning, purpose. The arm hadn't been reaching in randomly. It had been testing, probing, learning the layout of their prison. "Turn off the light," Ortiz whispered urgently. "They don't need it to see, but we're making ourselves targets." Jessica killed the phone light, plunging them back into absolute darkness. Immediately the sounds changed, became bolder, closer. Whatever was out there had been cautious of the light, but now in the darkness they were in their element. Franklin Whitaker said quietly, "Those stories about the deep miners. How much do you actually know?" "More than I wanted to believe," he admitted. "My grandfather didn't just work here. He was part of the team that sealed the lower levels. He said they didn't seal them to prevent cave-ins. They sealed them to keep something in. The mining company found people down there, or what used to be people. They'd been living in the natural caves that predated the mine, maybe for generations. The native tribes had legends about them. The underneath people, they called them. The tribes avoided this mountain for centuries before white settlers arrived." "Why didn't the mining company report it?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with pain and fear. "Bad for business," Ortiz replied simply. "You don't get investors by telling them you've discovered a race of caved-dwelling humanoids on your property. So they sealed the connecting tunnels, posted guards, and kept mining the upper levels. But sometimes miners would disappear. They'd be working adrift, take a wrong turn in the dark, and never be seen again. The company always blamed cave-ins, but the bodies were never found. A scratching sound, deliberate and rhythmic, began on the rock above them. Not random of probing this time, but purposeful work. They were being excavated, but not in any way that suggested rescue. This was something else. Careful, patient, like an archaeologist uncovering a delicate artifact. "They're mining us out," Jessica breathed. "They're going to take us." "No," Whitaker said firmly, checking her weapon again by touch. "We're getting out of here. When I give the signal, Jessica, turn on your light and keep it moving. Blind them. I'm going to fire through that gap. Make them back off." "What if that brings the rest of the ceiling down?" Marcus asked. "Then we die quick instead of whatever they have planned," Whitaker replied grimly. But before she could give the signal, everything changed. A massive impact shook their prison, not from inside but from outside. The sound of heavy machinery getting closer. Real rescue equipment? The chittering sounds grew agitated, almost panicked. The scratching stopped, and they could hear rapid movement away from their position, deeper into the collapsed mine system. Whatever those things were, they feared discovery by the outside world more than they desired, whatever they'd planned for the trapped humans. "We're here!" Whitaker shouted. 4 people trapped. "We're here." This time the response was immediate and human. "We hear you, stay calm. We're coming." The rescue took 4 more hours. 4 hours of careful excavation of engineers, calculating load-bearing weights of paramedics standing by with equipment. When the final rocks were pulled away and daylight flooded their prison, Whitaker had never seen anything more beautiful than that harsh Nevada sun. They were pulled out one by one, Marcus on a backboard with his legs splintered, Ortiz with 3 broken ribs, Jessica dehydrated but mobile, and Whitaker herself battered but functional. The rescue team was massive. Search and rescue, fire department, state police, even a news crew that had picked up the story. As they were being treated at the mobile medical unit, Whitaker overheard 2 of the rescue engineers talking. "Weirdest thing," one was saying. "The whole lower section is collapsed, completely inaccessible, but the seismic equipment is picking up movement down there. Extensive movement. Like there are still open chambers below the collapse. Aftershocks," the other suggested, rocks settling. "No, this is different. Organized patterns, almost like foot traffic, but that's impossible. Anyone down there would have been crushed instantly." Whitaker refused to be transported to the hospital until they'd accounted for Ray Henders. The search teams found his body 2 days later in a section of tunnel that should have been completely inaccessible after the collapse. He'd been dragged there. The marks were unmistakable, and what they found suggested he hadn't died from his gunshot wound or the cave-in. The coroner's report, which Whitaker only saw because she'd threatened to go to the press, described injuries inconsistent with known mining accidents. Ray's body showed signs of prolonged movement through impossibly narrow spaces. His bones compressed and reformed in ways that suggested he'd been reshaped. And his eyes had been removed with surgical precision, replaced with smooth riverstones that couldn't have come from anywhere in that mine. 3 weeks later, the state formally closed and sealed Silver Ridge, citing extreme structural instability. But Whitaker noticed they used methods she'd never seen before. Not just steel gates and concrete, but arrangements of iron and salt at every entrance, symbols painted in red that looked far older than any modern warning sign. She tried to follow up on the seismic readings, the movement the engineers had detected in the deep places. The records had been classified, the equipment confiscated by federal authorities who wouldn't identify which agency they represented. Marcus and Jessica recovered physically. Mentally was another story. They both started having the same recurring dream of standing at the edge of a vast underground chamber, lit by bioluminescent fungi, watching pale figures with too many joints arrange human bones in patterns that hurt to comprehend. In their dreams, the figures would always stop their work and turn toward them, and in voices like grinding stone make them an offer. Come deeper, the light hurts. Come be remade. Marcus committed himself to a psychiatric facility after 6 months. Jessica simply disappeared one night, leaving behind a note that read only, "They're still calling. I need to answer." Whitaker requested a transfer. She got it, moved to the Reno office, tried to forget. But sometimes late at night, she'd wake to the sound of rhythmic scratching on her bedroom walls. And when she'd turn on the lights, she'd find fresh dirt beneath her windows. Dirt that laboratory analysis confirmed came from 800 FT below the surface of the abandoned Prosperity mine. The county search and rescue team reported that Franklin Ortiz had gone back to Silver Ridge alone 3 months after the incident. They found his truck parked at the sealed entrance, his tools scattered around the broken gate. There was a note pinned to the steering wheel in his handwriting. "My grandfather was right about everything. They're not evil, just old and patient and lonely. They've been waiting so long for people who understand the deep places. I'm going to see the caverns he told me about. I'm going to see what's below." They never found his body. Sometimes Whitaker drives past Silver Ridge on her way to other calls. The town is still there, still slowly being reclaimed by the desert. But now, if you know where to look, you can see fresh footprints in the dust around the sealed mine entrance. Prints that appear overnight in patterns that circle the barriers without ever quite crossing them. Not yet. The seismic monitors that the state forgot to remove still transmit data, deep below the collapsed tunnels in chambers that shouldn't exist according to any map ever made. Something moves with purpose and patience, growing bolder, digging upward, waiting for the day when curiosity or greed or simple forgetfulness leads someone to break those seals. Whitaker keeps her service weapon loaded now, even at home. 13 rounds, same as always. She knows it won't be enough. Nothing would be, but it's a comfort anyway. In her desk drawer next to her badge, she keeps a piece of paper. On it, in her own handwriting, she's written the last thing she heard before they pulled her from that collapsed mine. Words she told herself were hallucination, oxygen deprivation, trauma-induced delusion. But late at night, when the scratching starts, she takes out that paper and reads it again. "We'll see you again, Sergeant. Down in the deep places." Everyone comes back eventually. Everyone comes home. The scratching on her walls grows louder each night. And sometimes, just sometimes, she finds herself wondering what it would be like to stop fighting, to accept the invitation, to finally understand what Franklin Ortiz understood, what Jessica chose, what Marcus dreams about in his hospital bed, to go deeper, to go home. Her transfer request to Alaska sits on her desk, unsigned. She tells herself she'll mail it tomorrow. She's been telling herself that for 3 weeks now. The scratching continues, and deep below Silver Ridge in caverns older than human memory, patient things wait for her inevitable return.